She was 13 years old, deaf since birth, and completely invisible to the world. Until the afternoon, she saw 5 men with rifles crouching behind a burned-out gas station, loading weapons in the Nevada heat. She couldn't hear the danger coming, but she could see exactly where it was going. 30 bikers, one bar, no warning. And the only person standing between them and a massacre was a terrified girl who hadn't spoken out loud in 3 years. What she did next, bleeding, breathless, alone on 3 miles of burning desert pavement, would change every single life inside that building, including hers. This is the story of Ariel Brooks, the girl nobody saw, until the day she ran toward danger instead of away from it. Stay with me until the end, because this story is going to hit you somewhere you're not expecting. If it does, hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I want to know where you are. Let's begin. The heat came off the asphalt in waves you could almost touch. Ariel Brooks had walked this road every day for 4 years. 2.5 miles of cracked Nevada highway connecting Cinder Valley Middle School to the cluster of rusting trailer homes at the edge of town, and she had memorized every seam in the pavement, every dead Joshua tree leaning at its particular angle, every faded mile marker bleached white by the sun. She knew which sections of shoulder had the sharpest gravel and which stretches of chain-link fence were loose enough to rattle in the wind without her having to feel the vibration in her feet first. She was deaf. Had been since the day she was born, the doctors had told her mother, who'd received that news the way she received most news that required sustained emotional effort, with a cigarette and a long silence that eventually just became the permanent silence between them. Ariel was used to silence. She'd built her entire life inside it. She walked with her backpack riding high, straps cinched tight the way she liked, a cracked whiteboard clipped to the outside strap where she could reach it fast. The whiteboard was her voice. Had been since 2nd grade when her interpreter stopped showing up, and the school district quietly filed the paperwork explaining why replacing her wasn't in the budget this semester. The marker was a dried-out blue Expo that still wrote if you pressed hard enough. She carried 3 backup markers in the front pocket. Always 3. Losing her markers meant losing her words, and losing her words meant disappearing entirely. She was already most of the way to invisible. She couldn't afford the rest of the distance. The sun was sitting low and brutal over the western ridge, painting the desert floor in shades of copper and rust. Ariel squinted into it without breaking stride. She'd learned young to read the sky the way hearing people read voices, for information, for warning, for the specific quality of light that meant a dust storm was building 20 miles out and she had maybe 40 minutes before it turned the air to sandpaper. Today the sky was clear. Just hot. Relentlessly, stupidly hot. The kind of Nevada afternoon that made the whole landscape look slightly melted at the edges. She was passing the old Ridgeline gas station. Closed for 11 years, she knew from the plywood over the pumps. She'd counted them once out of boredom, when something made her stop. Not a sound. She didn't get sounds. A shadow. Movement, actually. The specific quality of motion that her brain had learned to catch because she had nothing else to rely on. Something dark shifting behind the far corner of the station's collapsed service bay. Something that moved with the wrong kind of deliberateness. Slow, controlled, practiced. Not a stray dog. Not a kid cutting through. Ariel stopped walking. She stood very still on the shoulder of the road, backpack heavy on her shoulders, sweat tracking down the back of her neck. She watched. For 30 seconds, there was nothing. Just heat shimmer and the lonely quality of the desert afternoon. Then a hand appeared at the corner of the cinder block wall. A gloved hand. Black tactical gloves, the kind she'd seen in the hunting magazines her mother's boyfriend left piled on the kitchen counter. The hand was holding something that caught the late sunlight in a very specific way. Long, angular, deliberate. The barrel of a rifle. Ariel didn't run. She should have run. Instead, she crouched slowly behind a dead creosote bush and looked harder. There were 5 of them. She counted methodically, the way she counted everything because numbers never lied and didn't require sound to communicate. 5 men in black tactical clothing moving in the long shadow behind the gas station with the practiced quiet of people who had done this kind of thing before. They were spread in a rough line along the back wall, facing the highway. Facing, Ariel realized, with a cold that had nothing to do with the desert temperature, the direction of town. 2 of them had their rifles out and ready. One was crouched over a paper spread on the ground. A map, she thought, though she couldn't see details at this distance. The other two stood slightly back, heads turning in slow surveillance sweeps, watching the highway in both directions. She was very still behind the creosote bush. She was small. They hadn't seen her. She read what she could read, the way they stood, the discipline in the spacing, the absence of panic or hurry. These were not nervous people. These were people who had made a decision and were waiting very calmly to carry it out. Ariel looked down the highway toward town. A mile and a half out, barely visible in the heat haze, she could see the red neon of the Rusty Chain Bar. She knew that bar. Every kid in Cinder Valley knew it from a distance. The gravel lot full of motorcycles, the low rumble she sometimes felt through the soles of her shoes when she walked past on the opposite sidewalk. The men in leather cuts who stood outside in all weather without seeming to notice it. Her mother had told her to cross the street if she ever saw bikers and keep her eyes down and her whiteboard put away because people like that didn't need a reason to hurt someone small. But Ariel had watched those men for 4 years. She watched everything because watching was all she had. And what she'd seen wasn't what her mother described. She'd seen a man in a leather jacket crouch down in the parking lot to help a stray cat that was limping. She'd seen 2 big men with sleeve tattoos and hard faces carry an old woman's groceries to her car without being asked. She'd seen them stand in the cold at closing time and make sure a drunk college kid from the next town over got into a cab and not behind the wheel. She didn't know their names or their rules. She didn't know what the patches on their jackets meant or who they were at 2 in the morning when they weren't outside the bar. She knew what she'd watched. And right now, what she was watching was 5 armed men positioned between the highway and that bar, in a configuration that her 13-year-old brain, drawing on every action film she'd watched alone in her room with the closed captions on because it was the only company she had most nights, recognized as an ambush. She looked back at the men behind the gas station. One of them checked something on his wrist, a watch or a radio. She couldn't tell. He held up 3 fingers to the others. Some kind of countdown. 3. Her heart was hitting her ribs with a force she could feel in her throat. She looked at the bar, a mile and a half away. Maybe a little less. She looked at the 5 men. She looked at the highway, empty and shimmering. She looked at the bar again. There were no cars passing, no one to flag down. Her phone, a cracked prepaid that her mother's boyfriend had thrown against the wall 2 weeks ago when she'd accidentally stepped in front of the TV, had a shattered screen and no service on the best days anyway. Calling 911 was something that happened in a world that worked differently than hers. The man with the map stood up and folded it in a single practiced motion. Ariel Brooks, 13 years old, deaf since birth, invisible by necessity, looked at the Rusty Chain Bar and looked at the gas station and made a decision that she would spend the rest of her life not being able to fully explain. She ran, not away from it, toward it. She came off the shoulder of the highway at a dead sprint, cutting across the opposite side of the road in a wide arc that kept the burned-out gas station between her and the armed men. Her backpack bounced and slammed against her spine with every stride. The gravel shoulder tore at her sneakers. The desert heat pressed down like a physical weight, and within 40 seconds she was gasping in the dry, hot air, her lungs burning with the particular cruelty of altitude and heat combined. She ran. The pavement was the color of old bone. Her shadow stretched out long and thin beside her. She couldn't hear her own footfalls or her own breathing or anything at all, which in this particular moment was both the most terrifying and the most clarifying thing about her entire existence. There was no noise to panic through, no sound of pursuit to feed her fear. There was only the bar, growing fractionally larger with every stride, and the burning in her legs, and the single sentence she was composing in her head to write on the whiteboard the moment she got through the door. She didn't know if the men behind her had seen her break cover. She didn't look back. Looking back was how you slowed down, and she couldn't afford to slow down. At some point, she became aware that her left hand was bleeding. She must have caught the chain-link fence on the far edge of the gas station property without registering it. A shallow cut across 3 fingers, not serious, leaving faint red marks on the whiteboard clipped to her pack. She kept running. By the time the gravel parking lot of the Rusty Chain came under her feet, her vision was starting to blur at the edges from the heat and the exertion. She counted the motorcycles automatically, 14 of them lined up in their diagonal rows, chrome catching the afternoon sun, the The kind of machines that seemed larger up close than they ever did at a distance. She'd never stood in this parking lot before. It felt like standing in someone else's world. The door of the bar was a heavy wooden thing with a wrought iron handle and a small high window reinforced with wire mesh. There was no handle she could reach to knock. She nearly threw herself against it instead, both palms flat, pushing with the last of what she had. The door swung inward. The bar inside was dark after the blinding afternoon. The transition hit her like stepping into water. Sudden, total, overwhelming. She stood in the doorway for 2 full seconds before her eyes adjusted enough to make out the interior, and in those 2 seconds she became aware of the fact that the bar had gone completely still. Every person in the room, and there were many, she could feel the weight of their presence even before she could see faces, had turned toward her. She yanked the whiteboard off her pack. She uncapped the marker with her teeth. Her hands were shaking badly enough that the first word was barely legible. She wrote, "Armed men outside. They're going to kill you." Then she held it up with both hands, turning it slowly like she was showing it to every corner of the room. The silence that followed was a different quality from the silence she lived in. Hers was the absence of sound. This was the presence of held breath. A man separated himself from the bar. He was not a large man, or rather his size was not the first thing you noticed about him. What you noticed first was the stillness. He moved through the tables with a deliberateness that absorbed all the kinetic energy around him, the other men stepping back from him slightly the way water parts. Not from fear exactly, but from the recognition of gravity. He was perhaps 50, though his face was the kind of face that had been used hard and aged unevenly. Old scars layered under newer ones, a jaw that had been broken at least once from the line of it, eyes that were pale gray and very cold, and were currently looking at her whiteboard with an expression she would later identify as immediate belief. He had a patch on his chest that read, in blocky letters, "Burr Claw." He read her whiteboard once, looked at her face, looked at the whiteboard again. He turned to the room and made 2 gestures, short, clipped, the kind of motions that came from years of operating in environments where speaking was a liability. The bar went into motion like a machine whose switch had just been thrown. Men moved. Lights died. She heard nothing, but she felt the vibration of boots on floorboards, felt the change in air pressure as doors were checked, felt the low-level electrical quality of a room full of people shifting from civilian to something older and colder and considerably more competent. Burklaw looked back at her. She wrote on the whiteboard, fast, the letters jagged from her still shaking hands. "I'm deaf. 5 men. Rifles. Gas station on highway. Maybe 5 minutes." He took that in without any change in expression. Then he reached under the bar and came up with a radio. He didn't smile at her, or pat her shoulder, or tell her everything was going to be fine. He didn't waste any of that. What he did was look at her for 1 additional second in a way that communicated something she didn't have a word for at the time. Recognition, maybe. The specific recognition of one person who had learned to read the world without the safety net of easy communication looking at another. Then he pointed to a spot behind the bar and held up 1 finger. "Stay. Don't move." She went where he pointed. The men who came through the windows of the rusty chain bar that evening didn't expect what was waiting for them. The police found 3 of them zip-tied to the bar stools. The other 2 had been encouraged to wait in the parking lot under the supervision of 2 bikers who stood in the exact posture of men who had absolutely nothing to prove and had made that determination about themselves so long ago, it no longer required any particular effort. The rifles were stacked neatly beside the door. Sheriff's deputies from Cinder Valley arrived in 2 vehicles, took statements, called county, called the state, made the kind of phone calls that get made when a domestic terrorism incident gets interrupted by a better plan. The evening took on that particular quality of organized chaos. Radios, flashlights, the industrial lights of police cruisers strobing across the cinder block walls, and the chrome of 14 motorcycles. Ariel sat on a bar stool with a glass of water she hadn't touched and watched through the wire mesh window as the scene assembled itself outside. A woman sat next to her. Not young, not old, somewhere in between, with the particular toughness of someone who had been through a physical thing that left marks and had decided to carry those marks as information rather than evidence of damage. Her left arm was scarred from the wrist to the shoulder in a pattern that looked like old burned tissue, and she wore the sleeve of her leather jacket pushed up with the kind of practiced casualness that communicated she was done making other people comfortable about it. She had short, gray-streaked hair and eyes that were brown and warm and sharp at the same time, and she wore a cut that read, Donna, Ironside, Varner. She didn't reach for Ariel or touch her or offer platitudes. She sat down next to her on the adjacent bar stool and put a plate of crackers and a bag of beef jerky on the counter between them. Then she picked up the whiteboard, which Ariel had set down on the bar, and wrote in a clean, legible hand, "You ran 3 miles. In this heat. You're 13?" Ariel took the board, wrote back 12 and a half. Donna read it. Something moved through her face, not pity, which Ariel was deeply allergic to and could spot from a significant distance. Something else. Something that had a specific weight to it that she didn't understand yet. Donna wrote, "That was the bravest damn thing I've ever seen in my life." Ariel stared at the words. She'd been called a lot of things in her 12 and a half years. Ghost was a common one, because she moved through rooms without anyone reacting to her presence. Quiet was the polite version. Weird was the school version. Her mother's boyfriend had a rotating vocabulary for her that she preferred not to repeat even in the privacy of her own thoughts. Brave was not on the list. She didn't know what to write back, so she ate a cracker and looked out the window. Burklaw came back into the bar about 40 minutes later, when the immediate exterior chaos had calmed to a managed murmur. He stood across the bar from her and looked at her cut hand, which she'd wrapped in a bar napkin that was now rust-colored and stiff. He looked at her water glass, still untouched. He looked at the cracker plate, slightly diminished. He reached under the bar, came up with a first aid kit, set it on the counter in front of her without comment. She looked at it, looked at him. He raised an eyebrow that communicated, in a language that required no words and therefore suited her perfectly. "Go ahead. I'm not going to watch you bleed on my bar all night." She cleaned the cuts. He watched the door. Donna refilled the cracker plate. Nobody talked about feelings. Nobody talked about her, or what she'd done, or what it meant. They just occupied the same space in a way that was, Ariel realized with a sensation she couldn't immediately categorize, deeply familiar to her in the sense that she had always imagined this was how it would feel to be in a room with people who were not performing anything. A sheriff's deputy came in at some point and sat across from her with a notepad and asked her questions that Donna wrote down for her in a legible hand, translating what Ariel wrote back. It took 20 minutes. The deputy was professionally kind in the way of someone who is very busy and trying to remember to be decent. He told her she'd done a good thing. He wrote down her address. He said someone would be in touch about formal statements. He left. Ariel looked at the address she'd given, the trailer at the end of Mesquite Road. She thought about what was waiting for her there. Not her mother, who worked nights at the casino outside town, and was therefore almost always absent in the specific way that was somehow lonelier than outright abandonment. She thought about Dale Pruitt, her mother's boyfriend for the past 8 months, who had Dale's particular brand of presence that filled a room with a static electricity of barely managed threat. Dale, who had grown very, very interested in the news coverage playing on the bar's mute TV right now, the footage of police cruisers outside this building, the talking head segment scrolling a subtitle that read, "Armed attack on local bar foiled by anonymous tip." Anonymous. Ariel looked at the TV and thought, that's not going to last. She was right, but she didn't know yet how right. The walk home was nearly dark. Donna had offered to drive her. Burklaw had not offered, but had looked at Donna with an expression that communicated the offer would be made and accepted. Ariel had written on her whiteboard, "I'm fine. I walk it every day." Which was true. Which was also, like most true things, not the whole story. She walked the highway shoulder in the blue-gray Nevada dusk with the first stars coming out over the eastern ridge and the bar's neon receding behind her. Her legs hurt. Her hand hurt. The adrenaline had metabolized into something heavy and close, a kind of dense emotional weight sitting on her chest that she knew from experience required distance and dark and solitude to process. She was almost to the trailer park entrance when she felt the vibration of the door before she reached it. Not footsteps. Not a gentle knock. The specific reverberant thud of something being thrown against an interior wall with significant force. She stopped on the path, backpack still on. The windows of the trailer were lit yellow. She could see Dale's shadow moving inside, large and fast, and not cooking dinner, large and fast. Something else. She stood there for a while. Then she reached for her whiteboard marker and wrote something on the board that she looked at for a long time before erasing and writing again. She erased it again and put the marker away. She went inside. Dale Pruitt was not a subtle man, and he did not practice subtlety. He was in his early 40s with the build of someone who had been genuinely strong once and had let it go to a specific kind of softness that was denser and more dangerous than it looked. He had a face that arranged itself into expressions the way a closed fist arranges itself into a closed fist, with complete commitment and very little variation. When he was angry, the anger was total. When he was calm, the calm was the practiced kind that preceded something. Tonight he was watching the TV with the news feed about the bar. His beer was open on the counter. His phone was in his hand with the screen lit. He looked at Ariel when she came in. He looked at her backpack. He looked at the whiteboard with its smeared traces of previous writings. He looked at her hand, bandaged now with medical tape from the first aid kit she'd borrowed and not returned, though she'd left money for it, exactly $4 from the emergency fold in her sock. He looked at her for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and held it toward her, not to show her something, but in the specific way of a man demonstrating that he had just made a call, that someone had just told him something, that the information landscape had recently shifted and he was repositioning within it. He typed something on his phone and held up the screen. It read, "Heard someone ran to the bar today. Anonymous tip." "Funny thing, Ariel." She looked at it, looked at him. Kept her face neutral the way she'd learned to keep it neutral since she was 7 years old and discovered that a neutral face gave away nothing and invited less. She started to move toward her bedroom. His hand came around her backpack strap before she made 3 steps. Not violent, not yet. That particular precision of a man who understood exactly where the line was and was currently standing with his feet touching it. He pulled her around to face him. His expression was doing the thing it did. He pointed at the TV, pointed at her. Pointed at the phone in his hand with deliberate slowness. He typed again, held up the screen. "You're going to fix this." Ariel looked at the words, looked at his face. She wrote on her whiteboard, "I don't know what you mean." She held it up. He read it. His jaw tightened in its particular way. He typed again, "These are not people you mess with. You're going to tell them you were wrong. You saw nothing. You made it up. And if you don't, your life in this town is going to get very small, very fast." She stared at the screen. She thought about the 5 men with rifles. She thought about Burklaw's face when he read her first message, the immediate belief, the total absence of dismissal. She thought about Donna's handwriting on the whiteboard. "That was the bravest damn thing I've ever seen." She thought about Dale's hand on her backpack strap. She wrote on the whiteboard, "I didn't see anything." She held it up. He looked at it for a long moment. Then something in his face changed to the other thing, the thing she liked less than the anger, because the anger at least had a shape. He let go of her strap. He pointed toward her bedroom. He typed one more thing and held it up as she walked away. "We'll talk tomorrow." She went into her room. She sat on her bed in the dark. She thought about tomorrow. She thought about the men with zip ties and the police cruisers and the talking head segment on the news. She thought about how small the town of Cinder Valley was, and how fast information moved through small towns, and how completely non-anonymous an anonymous tip from the only deaf girl in the county school district actually was. She thought about Dale's phone screen. These are not people you mess with. The thing was, Ariel thought, sitting in her dark room with the desert wind beginning to move against the trailer's thin aluminum walls. The thing that Dale had either not considered or not understood was that applied in more than one direction. She reached under her bed. She pulled out the backpack she kept there, the second one, the one she'd packed and repacked 17 times since she was 10 years old. Emergency pack. Her interpreter in 2nd grade had told her once about a thing called a go bag, for emergencies, natural disasters, situations where you needed to move fast. She'd built hers out of careful accumulation, rolled clothes, 2 granola bars from the school cafeteria she'd saved for 3 months, backup markers, the library card from 2 counties over that nobody knew she had, the $43 in small bills she'd been collecting from spare change dishes for 2 years, The cracked whiteboard was clipped to the front. She held it for a while. Then she took the active whiteboard from her pack, the one she'd carried today, and looked at the faint traces of erased writing that were still visible in the right light. The sentence she'd written outside the trailer and then erased. "I'm not going back in." She sat with that for a long time. Then she heard, or rather felt, through the soles of her feet on the trailer floor, through the thin walls, through the vibration that her body had learned to read the way other bodies read sound, a familiar pattern. Dale's phone ring vibration against the counter, his footsteps moving to the kitchen, the particular quality of the trailer going alert. Something had happened. Some piece of information had arrived that was changing the shape of the night. She clipped the go bag to her back. She picked up the active whiteboard and the markers. She pulled on her second layer, an oversized hoodie she wore in all weather because the hood made her less visible. And she went to her bedroom window. The window was old and painted shut except for the bottom 6 inches that she'd worked loose over 2 years of careful incremental pressure until it moved reliably enough to be useful. She'd never used it. She'd just wanted it to exist, like the go bag, like the extra markers, like every precaution she'd ever built into her life, quietly, without explaining it to anyone, against the possibility of exactly this. She eased the window up. The desert night came in, cool now, the temperature drop that hit Nevada hard after dark, carrying the smell of dry earth and something farther out, sage or creosote, clean and neutral and indifferent. She looked back at her room, the mattress on the floor with the library books stacked beside it, the shelf with the 3 things she cared about: a photograph, a broken compass she'd found in the school parking lot, a stub of candles she'd kept from a blackout 2 winters ago and never burned. She couldn't take the shelf. She didn't take the photograph because photographs meant having a past she was still attached to. And she'd decided in the last 40 seconds that she was done being attached to anything in this room. She went through the window. She stood in the side yard of the trailer park in the dark, her breath visible in the cooling night air, her backpack settled, her whiteboard in hand. The neon of the highway was a distant pulse to the northwest. She could see the faint red smear of the bar sign from here. She could have gone anywhere. She could have walked to the school, which had a 24-hour security light and a covered entrance where she'd slept once before when she was 11 during a bad week, and nobody had noticed until morning. She could have walked to the gas station by the on-ramp that was staffed all night. She stood in the dark for a moment, feeling the desert wind move across the flats, feeling the ground under her feet the way she always felt everything, through the soles of her shoes, through the long, slow vibration of the earth. Then she started walking northwest, toward the red neon, toward the only place she realized that had looked at her today and seen exactly what she was, a girl who'd run 3 miles on burning pavement to warn strangers who didn't know her name, and responded not with confusion or dismissal or pity, but with a first aid kit placed quietly on the counter and a plate of crackers filled twice without being asked. She didn't know what she was walking toward. She knew what she was walking away from. The desert was cold and very quiet, and somewhere behind her the trailer park lights receded, and somewhere ahead the red neon grew fractionally larger with every step, and Ariel Brooks, 12.5 years old and carrying everything she owned on her back, walked through the Nevada dark, with her whiteboard in her hand and her spare markers in her pocket, and absolutely no plan beyond the single most dangerous thought she'd ever had in her life. They felt safer than home ever did. She was halfway there when she became aware of something she hadn't considered. There were headlights behind her, coming slow. Very slow. Not passing speed slow. The kind of slow that meant whoever was driving had seen her and was matching her pace and had not, as of yet, turned on a police light, or honked, or done anything that people did when they stopped for a lost kid on a dark highway. They were just there, following. And Ariel Brooks, who could not hear the engine behind her, who could not hear the crunch of tires on gravel shoulder, who had only the wash of headlights stretching her shadow out ahead of her, to tell her she was no longer alone on this road, kept walking toward the red neon because there was nothing else to do, because there was no world in which stopping made her safer, because the thing behind her was either something dangerous or something worse, and the bar sign ahead of her was growing, slowly, bar by bar, of red neon, like a lighthouse at the edge of a very dark sea. The headlights didn't speed up. That was the thing that kept Ariel moving instead of diving into the roadside ditch and waiting it out. The speed stayed exactly constant, matching her walking pace with the patience of something that wasn't in a hurry because it didn't need to be. Police would have hit the lights by now. A drunk driver would have drifted. Someone who meant her accidental harm would have already done it. This was deliberate. She kept her eyes forward and counted her steps the way she counted everything, as information, as anchor, as the one system that never lied to her. 43 steps. 44. The red neon of the bar was close enough now that she could see the individual letters and the way the R in Rusty had a slow flicker to it, a half-second stutter like a heartbeat with a slight irregularity. 48 steps. The gravel lot was visible. 2 motorcycles still parked outside, their chrome catching the distant bar light. The headlights stopped. Not gradually, they just stopped. One moment they were stretching her shadow ahead of her, and the next moment they were off, and the night behind her was dark again, and whoever had been back there was now sitting in that darkness, either watching her walk the last 100 yards to the bar or doing something she couldn't see and therefore couldn't factor into any calculation. She did not look back. She crossed the gravel lot in 12 steps and pushed through the heavy door. Amat. The bar was different at night. Not physically different. Same low ceiling, same scarred wood bar top, same neon beer signs, and the smell of cigarette smoke and old wood, and the particular chemical undertone of cleaning solution that never quite won against everything else. But the quality of the occupancy had changed. The afternoon crowd had been men moving with purpose, responding to a situation, military efficient, and closed off. This was smaller, quieter, the aftermath kind of quiet, when the work is done and the people who do that kind of work have come back down from it and are sitting with their drinks and the particular heaviness that lives in the gap between action and reflection. 4 men at the far table, 2 at the bar, Donna at the far end with a coffee and a phone she was reading with her reading glasses on, which somehow made her look more formidable rather than less. Burklaw was behind the bar. He saw her the moment she came through the door. His eyes went to her backpack, the go bag, the one she'd had under her bed, and then to her face, and then to the whiteboard she was already uncapping her marker against. She wrote, "Someone followed me on the road. Dark car. No lights at the end." She held it up. He read it, set down the glass he was drying, looked at the 2 men at the bar and made a gesture, 2 fingers, pointed at the door. They were outside before she'd finished reading his expression. He looked back at her. She wrote, "I left. I can't go back tonight." He read it. His face did the thing where it didn't change, but something shifted behind it, some internal reckoning she couldn't fully track. He looked at Donna. Donna had already taken her reading glasses off. They put her in the back room. Not a storage room. It was clearly some kind of office that had been made functional for sleeping at some point, possibly multiple points, given the cot against the wall with its military fold blanket and the small electric radiator in the corner that put out a thin, honest heat. There was a metal shelf with a row of technical manuals and 1 paperback novel with a broken spine. A window with a heavy curtain and a lock she could see was functional, a bolt on the inside of the door. Donna stood in the doorway while Ariel put her go-bag down on the floor beside the cot. She wrote on the whiteboard and held it up for Donna. "I don't need charity." Donna read it, took the board, wrote back, "It's not charity, it's a cot and a door with a lock. You can leave whenever you want." Ariel looked at that. Donna wrote again, under the first line, "The men Griff sent outside found the car. It was parked on the shoulder about 200 yards back from the lot. Ran before they reached it. No plates." Ariel read it twice. She wrote, "Is that normal?" Donna's expression did something complicated. She wrote, "No." She handed the board back and leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed and her scarred arm visible below the pushed-up sleeve, and she looked at Ariel with the specific, focused attention of someone who was deciding how much to say. She took the board and wrote, "The men who came today. They're called the Iron Crusaders. You know that name?" Ariel shook her head. "They've been working their way up the Nevada chapter network for 2 years. Burning people out, killing people out. They want the territory, and they're not particular about methods." Donna paused, looked at the board, added, "The man who sent them today. We know who he is. We've known for a while. Tonight changes some things." Ariel read it, looked at Donna's face, wrote, "What kind of things?" Donna took the board. She held it for a moment without writing anything. Then she wrote 2 words and handed it back. Dangerous things. She left the door open 3 inches, and her footsteps moved away down the hall, and Ariel sat on the cot in the thin electric heat with the whiteboard in her lap and thought about Dale Pruitt's phone and the text that had read, "These are not people you mess with," and the particular way he'd said it, not like a warning exactly, more like a man who was reading from a script he'd been given, more like a man who had made a phone call before she got home and had received, in return, certain instructions. She thought about the car with no plates parked 200 yards down the road. She lay down on the cot with her shoes still on, and the go bag within arm's reach, and the bolt thrown on the door, and she stared at the ceiling and didn't sleep for a very long time. Dimasum. Morning came through the heavy curtain in a thin, specific line of Nevada light. She heard, felt, the bar coming alive through the floor, the vibration of boots, the particular rhythm of a space that was populated by people who moved with physical weight and intention. She unlocked the door and found the hallway empty and the main bar area occupied by Burklaw at the far table with a man she hadn't seen before, the 2 of them leaning over something spread between them on the table. Papers, she thought, or maps, with coffee going cold at their elbows. The man with Burklaw was younger, 30s maybe, with a lean, coiled spring quality to him that registered even from across the room. His cut read "Rowdy" across the top rocker. He had the face of a man who had decided a long time ago that smiling was a resource to be conserved. He looked up when she came out of the hallway, and his eyes did a quick, comprehensive scan of her that was professional rather than hostile, the kind of assessment that was about information, not threat. And then he looked back at the papers. Burklaw looked at her, pointed at the coffee machine behind the bar. She went and poured herself a cup and drank it standing at the bar because sitting felt like a decision she wasn't ready to make. The coffee was black and strong and slightly burned, and it was the best thing she'd tasted in recent memory. Donna came in from the back at some point with her own cup and sat at the bar, 2 stools down from where Ariel was standing. For a while, neither of them communicated anything. The 2 men talked at their table in a way that produced no vibration she could read clearly. Too low, too contained. Then Donna tapped the bar surface twice to get Ariel's attention and picked up the whiteboard that Ariel had set on the counter. She wrote, "School today?" Ariel looked at it. The question had more architecture than its 3 words contained. School meant leaving this building. Leaving this building meant being visible on the road. At school, in the specific way she'd been visible yesterday. The wrong kind of visible, the kind that had put a car with no plates 200 yards behind her in the dark. She wrote, "Probably not safe." Donna read it. Wrote, "Griff's already made calls. 2 of our people will be at the school entrance when it opens. Plain clothes." Ariel looked at that. Wrote, "Why?" Donna looked at her over the rim of her coffee. She wrote slowly, "Because you're 12 years old and you saved 30 people's lives, and someone followed you home in the dark. That's why." Ariel stared at the whiteboard for a moment longer than she needed to. She wrote, "I'm 12 and a half." Donna looked at it, and something crossed her face that might, on a different kind of face, have been the beginning of a smile. She wrote, "Noted." The problem arrived at 9:15 in the form of a man named Cutter. She'd been sitting in the bar for 2 hours by then, doing schoolwork from her bag. She carried her coursework out of habit, the same habit that had her carrying 3 backup markers and a go bag, the habit of preparing for environments that wouldn't accommodate her. When the door opened and 3 men came in with the particular energy of people who had been discussing something heatedly on the other side of it and had not reached a resolution. The first one, the one who preceded the others, was Cutter. He was maybe 45, wide through the chest, with the kind of face that was blunt and honest about being blunt. His cut had road captain patches and the specific wear pattern of someone who spent genuine time on a bike in actual weather rather than for aesthetics. He wasn't hostile when he came through the door. He was something more difficult than hostile. He was practical. He looked at Ariel at the table, looked at Burklaw behind the bar, looked back at Ariel with an expression that was doing the specific work of not being unkind while also being completely direct. He pulled out a chair at the next table over and sat in it backwards, arms crossed over the back, and looked at Burklaw. "We need to talk about the kid." He didn't lower his voice. He said it the way men like him said things they'd already decided needed to be said. Plainly, without ornamentation, because softening it was a waste of everyone's time. Ariel couldn't hear him. She could read the shape of the words from his mouth, imperfectly. She'd been working on lip-reading her whole life with mixed results, and American English was particularly uncooperative, but kid she caught, and the direction of his eyes, and the general architecture of the conversation. Burklaw looked at Cutter. He looked at Ariel. He made a decision in about 2 seconds and picked up the whiteboard from the bar and wrote on it and brought it to her table. "He wants to talk about you being here. I'm going to let you hear it. Tell me if you want to leave the room." She read it, looked up at Burklaw, wrote, "I'll stay." He nodded once, pulled the chair across from her, turned it around the same way Cutter had, sat down. He looked at Cutter and made a slight gesture. "Go ahead." Cutter looked at Ariel for a moment with the expression of a man who was adjusting his approach and not entirely comfortable with how he was landing. Then he looked at Burklaw and spoke, and Donna, who had appeared in the doorway with her coffee, began writing on the whiteboard in her clean, legible hand, relaying the conversation. He's saying, "She did a brave thing." Nobody's saying otherwise. "But she can't stay here." Donna wrote it as Cutter spoke, keeping up well. "The Crusaders are going to connect her to the tip eventually. They probably already have. She's a liability here, not because we don't want to protect her, but because her being here gives them a reason to come back at us in a way that has legal complications. She's a minor. Cops are already interested in this location. He's saying there's a children's services number, and there are proper channels." Ariel read it. She looked at Cutter. She picked up the whiteboard and wrote clearly, in large letters, "I lived with my mother's boyfriend, who is connected to the men who came yesterday." She slid it across the table to Cutter. He read it. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at Burklaw. Burklaw's expression communicated nothing useful. Cutter looked back at Ariel and said something. Donna wrote, "He's asking how you know that." Ariel wrote, "He showed me a text last night. It said, 'These are not people you mess with.' He knew about the tip before the news did. He knew it was me." Donna wrote it as she read it aloud for the room. The temperature of the room changed in the specific way she'd learned to read it, not through sound, but through the quality of stillness that descended on the men, the way their weight settled differently in their seats, the way Cutter's jaw tightened and Rowdy, who was still at his table, looked up from his papers with an expression that was recalibrating. Cutter said something short. Donna wrote, he said, "Damn." Then Burklaw spoke for the first time in the conversation, and Donna wrote what he said with the careful precision of someone transcribing testimony. "She stays. She's under protection until we understand the Crusaders' connection to the boyfriend. After that, we talk to her mother. But she doesn't go anywhere alone until we know what we're dealing with." Cutter looked at Burklaw for a long moment. Then he looked at Ariel. Then he looked at his own hands on the back of the chair, which was the expression of a man who had made a practical argument and found it overridden by something older than practicality. He said one thing. Donna wrote, he said, "Your house, your call, Griff. But this gets complicated fast." He stood up, righted the chair, and went back to the door. The two men who'd come in with him followed. The door closed. The room was quiet. Ariel looked at Burklaw. She wrote, "What did you mean about my mother?" He read it. He wrote back slowly, "Someone needs to tell her where you are. That should be your choice. We won't make it for you." She looked at that for a long time. She wrote, "She won't come." He read it. His expression did the thing she was beginning to recognize as his version of a response to information that landed hard, a slight compression at the corners of his eyes, a quality of stillness that was not indifference but its exact opposite. He wrote, "Okay." Just that. Okay. Not an argument, not a reassurance, not the particular brand of optimistic counter-narrative that adults usually offered when she said true things about her mother that they found uncomfortable. Just acknowledgement. She drank the rest of her coffee. She went to school. Not because she felt safe, because Donna had pointed out, in her direct and non-embellished way, that disappearing from school entirely would create a different kind of attention. The formal kind, involving county officials and mandatory reporting, and the specific machinery of institutional concern that once activated had a momentum of its own that was very difficult to redirect. The two men from the bar were already there when she arrived, positioned at the edges of the school entrance with the practiced casualness of people who were very good at not looking like what they were. One of them had a coffee from the gas station on the corner. The other had his phone out. Neither of them looked at her directly, but she felt the quality of their attention the same way she felt the low-frequency vibration of a Harley engine, not through sound, but through something older and more reliable than sound. School was school. She moved through it the way she always moved through it, efficiently, invisibly, with the particular self-sufficiency of someone who had built a complete internal system for navigating environments that didn't make accommodation for her. Her teachers had stopped using her interpreter slot in the daily schedule 4 months ago and hadn't replaced it. She read lips and context and coursework and managed. She always managed. In second period, she became aware that a girl in her class, Maya Sorensen, blonde, popular in the specific way that required maintenance and infrastructure, was watching her with an expression that was not the usual performed indifference. It was speculative, alert. The expression of someone who had put two things together and was looking at Ariel differently because of the new shape the combination made. After class, Maya stopped her in the hallway. She said something that Ariel caught most of. Heard it was you, at the bar. That you ran and told them. Ariel looked at her, kept her face neutral, wrote on her whiteboard. I don't know what you're talking about. Maya read it. Her expression said she didn't believe it, but she also wasn't equipped for the version of this conversation where Ariel refused to cooperate. She said something else. Ariel caught, people are saying your name. Thought you should know. Then she walked away. Ariel stood in the hallway for a moment. People are saying your name. She thought about the car with no plates on the dark highway. She thought about Donna's 2 words, dangerous things. She thought about the fact that her name was very short and not particularly anonymous in a school district where she was the only deaf student. She went to the bathroom and stood at the sink with the water running and watched her own hands under the faucet. The cut across 3 fingers from the chain-link fence was cleaned and taped. It didn't hurt much anymore. In 2 weeks it would be a scar, and in 2 years she probably wouldn't notice it. The things that had happened because of those 3 miles on that burning pavement were going to be harder to stop noticing. She was at her locker after 5th period when she felt the vibration of someone approaching from behind with unusual speed. Not running, but close to it. The specific gait of someone moving fast through a crowded hallway. She turned around. The vice principal, Mr. Garza, was coming toward her with his lanyard bouncing and an expression on his face that she read in about 1 second as, "Something has happened and it concerns you specifically." He stopped in front of her. He was a man who usually spoke to her with the particular careful over-enunciation of someone who had once read a pamphlet about communicating with deaf students and retained the general shape of the advice without the nuance. Today he wasn't doing that. He was speaking quickly. She caught, "You're home. Police are there. They need mother, boyfriend." She wrote fast. "What happened?" He hesitated. He was reading something on his phone while he tried to figure out how to tell her. He showed her the phone. It was a news alert. Local. The headline read, "Man detained at Mesquite Road property in connection with Tuesday bar incident. Dale." Dale had been picked up. She looked at the headline and felt something happen in her chest that was not grief and not relief and not anything she had a clean word for. More like the sensation of a door closing on something. The specific hollow sound of a latch engaging on a thing that had been open for a long time. She wrote, "I'm not going home." Garza read it. He said something. She caught, "Someone to call? Family?" She thought about it for exactly as long as she needed to. She reached into her front pocket and took out a small piece of paper. She'd asked Donna for the bar's number before she left this morning, and Donna had written it down without asking why, because Donna understood that preparation was not pessimism. And she handed it to Garza. "Call this number," she wrote. "Tell them Ariel needs to leave school." Rowdy came to get her. He arrived in a truck rather than on a bike. Late model, black, clean, in the specific way of a vehicle, maintained for function rather than appearance. He pulled up to the school entrance and sat in the driver's seat with the engine running and his arm resting on the window frame. And the two men who'd been at the entrance all day materialized from their positions and flanked the truck's rear in a configuration that was so practiced it might have been choreographed. She got in. He drove without speaking for a while, which suited her perfectly. She watched the town scroll past the window, the familiar dead-end texture of Cinder Valley in the afternoon, the pawn shop with the security screen, the dollar store with the fluorescent light out on one side, the park where nobody ever parked. Places she'd walked past for 12 years that were beginning to look like the backdrop of someone else's story, rather than her own. At a red light, Rowdy picked up the whiteboard from the seat between them and wrote something without taking his eyes off the road ahead. He handed it to her. "Griff wants to talk to you tonight, about the boyfriend, about what you know." She read it, wrote, "Okay." He took it back, looked at it, wrote, "It's going to get harder before it gets easier." She looked at that, wrote back, "I know." He read it and nodded once, with the minimal acknowledgement of a man who appreciated the specific economy of that response, and put the truck in gear when the light changed. They were 2 blocks from the bar when she felt him tense. She could see it in his arm on the steering wheel, the particular way the muscles changed, the controlled deceleration that was not normal traffic speed deceleration. She followed his sightline. 3 motorcycles were parked on the street outside the bar. Not Harley-Davidsons. The wrong profile. Smaller, more angular, the kind of bikes that prioritize speed over presence. And the men standing with them wore cuts that were not the ones she'd seen yesterday. Rowdy wrote fast without stopping the truck, just idling slowly past on the opposite side of the street. "Stay down. Don't look." She looked. She couldn't help it. She looked directly at the men outside the bar, and the men looked directly back at the truck, with the specific measuring quality of people who were in the middle of deciding something. And one of them, the one in the center, the one with the right posture of a man in charge, looked directly at her through the passenger window with an expression that had no heat in it at all, which was the thing about it that went cold along the back of her neck. Rowdy accelerated past. He wrote at the next light, one-handed, fast. "Those are Crusaders. Second tier, not the ones from yesterday. Different cell." She wrote, "How many cells are there?" He read it, didn't write back for a moment. Then, more than Griff thought. She looked at that. Then she wrote, "The man who looked at me." He saw my face. Rowdy read it. His jaw tightened. He wrote, "Yes." She put the whiteboard in her lap and looked out the windshield at the Nevada afternoon and felt the shape of the situation reorganizing itself around her into something new and considerably less containable. Yesterday, she had been a girl who saw something and made a decision. That was over. That version of events was closed. The man with no heat in his eyes had seen her face, and he knew exactly what she looked like now. Rowdy took a different route to the bar. He parked in the alley behind it, and they went in through the back entrance, through a door she hadn't known existed, down a short hallway that smelled like engine oil and old coffee. He moved fast, and she moved with him, matching his pace without being told to. Burklaw was in the back room, her room, the one with the cot, and he wasn't alone. Cutter was there again, and 2 other men she didn't know, and Donna in the corner with her arms crossed, and an expression that communicated the specific weariness of someone watching a situation develop exactly as she'd predicted it would. Burklaw looked at Rowdy. Rowdy wrote something on the whiteboard and handed it to Burklaw. Burklaw read it. His face did the compression thing. He wrote on the whiteboard and gave it to Ariel. "Crusaders outside. How many did you see?" She wrote, 3 bikes, 4 men. He showed it to the room. Cutter said something short. Donna wrote it for Ariel. He said, "They're not here to hit us. They're here to count us." Burklaw wrote, "And now they've seen you." She looked at him, wrote, "I'm sorry." He read it. Something passed through his face, quick, real, gone before she could fully read it. He wrote back, and the writing was slower than usual, more deliberate. "Don't apologize. This isn't your fault." She looked at that for a moment. Donna came forward from the corner and took the whiteboard and wrote. She wrote for longer than usual, and when she handed the board back, her face had the quality of someone who had been deciding whether to say something for a while and had decided. "The man you saw looking at you, his name is probably Tarvis. He runs the Western Nevada cell. He has a specific reputation for going after soft targets. He does it to send messages. Griff and I have been trying to get ahead of this for 3 months, and what happened today just moved the timeline up. Which means what I'm about to say needs to be your decision because you're the one it affects. Ariel read it carefully. Donna wrote more. We can take you out of Cinder Valley tonight. Put you somewhere safe until this is finished. You'd be with a family we trust, 2 hours east, safe, anonymous, completely off the map. Ariel read it. Wrote, or? Donna took the board. Wrote, or you stay here, with us. Which means you're in the middle of this, fully, and it's going to get very loud before it's done, and there's no version of it where you're not affected. Ariel read both options. She thought about the room 2 hours east, anonymous, safe, off the map. She thought about what anonymous felt like. She already knew she'd been living it for 12 years. She knew exactly what the texture of invisible felt like at 2 in the morning in a room where nobody knew your name. She thought about Burklaw's face when he read her whiteboard the first time. The immediate belief. The total absence of dismissal. She thought about Donna writing bravest damn thing in the clean, legible hand of someone who meant it. She wrote, I stay. Donna read it. She didn't argue. She didn't soften it or add conditions or circle back to the safer option. She just looked at Ariel with the expression of someone who had been watching for a specific thing and had just seen it, and she gave the whiteboard to Burklaw. He read it. He looked at Ariel for a long moment, with the pale gray eyes that were cold and present and completely attentive. Then he gave the whiteboard back to Donna and turned to the room and said something that produced immediate motion from every man in it. The gathering up quality of a decision being implemented, bodies moving from deliberation to execution. Donna wrote one last thing and handed Ariel the board. Okay, then we go to work. Ariel looked at the words and something shifted in her chest. Not the door-closing sensation of earlier, not the hollowness. Something with more structure to it. Something that had the particular weight of a decision that was going to matter. She nodded, and Donna crossed the room to the metal shelf on the wall and moved the row of technical manuals to one side. And behind them, bolted flush to the drywall, was a panel with a keypad that Ariel had not noticed before. Donna typed in a code. The panel opened. Inside was not what Ariel expected. Not weapons, not money, not the artifacts of whatever world she'd been imagining from the outside of it. It was a communications array. Radios, a laptop running feeds from cameras Ariel didn't know existed, contact sheets and maps, and the kind of organizational infrastructure that belonged to people who had been running a security operation for considerably longer than the last 2 days. Burklaw sat down in front of the laptop. He pulled on a headset. And Ariel Brooks stood in the doorway of a back room in a Nevada bar, 12.5 years old, with everything she owned in a bag on the floor, and watched the man who had believed her without hesitation begin making calls to people she would never meet in places she would never see, and understood for the first time. Not just that she was in danger, but that the danger had a specific shape now, and the shape had her face in it. And somewhere across Cinder Valley, a man named Tarvis, with no heat in his eyes, was making his own calls to his own people. And the number 50,000 was the first thing on the list. The number 50,000 changed everything. Not because money was the point. Money was never the point in the kind of war that got fought in back rooms with communications arrays and maps full of marked locations. The point was the message embedded in the number. The specific, deliberate message of putting a price on a 12-year-old girl that was large enough to be taken seriously by people who did that kind of work professionally, which meant the Iron Crusaders were not interested in containment anymore. They were interested in elimination. They wanted the witness gone, and they wanted everyone in Nevada to know they'd wanted it, and the 50,000 was the announcement. Burklaw found out at 11:15 that night. Ariel was still in the back room. She wasn't sleeping, had not been sleeping, had been lying on the cot in the thin electric heat reading the same page of the paperback novel with the broken spine for 40 minutes because her mind wouldn't settle into anything, kept pulling back to the man outside the bar with no heat in his eyes. When Donna opened the door without knocking and came in and sat on the edge of the cot and picked up the whiteboard from the floor. She wrote carefully and held it up. There's a bounty. $50,000. Confirmed through 3 separate sources in the last hour. It went out on their network tonight. Ariel read it. She read it again. She wrote, "For me." Donna looked at the two words. She wrote, "Yes." Ariel sat up on the cot. She put her feet on the floor and sat with her elbows on her knees and her hands clasped and looked at the wall for a while. The electric radiator put out its thin, faithful heat. The fluorescent light in the hallway made a thin line under the door. She wrote, "How many people are on their network?" Donna took the board. She held it for a moment. She wrote, "Enough that by morning your description is going to be in every phone in 4 states." Ariel looked at that. She thought about her face, the specificity of it. Not a common face, not one that blurred easily into a crowd. She thought about Tarvis outside the bar, the measuring quality of his look, the professional thoroughness of it. He hadn't looked at her like she was a child. He'd looked at her like she was a coordinate. She wrote, "What does Burklaw want to do?" Donna took the board and stood up and went to the door. She paused. She wrote one more thing and handed the board back from the doorway. "He wants to talk to you, but he wanted me to tell you first. So you had a minute." She left. Ariel sat in the thin heat with the whiteboard in her hands and the number 50,000 in her head. And she thought about the specific texture of the last 24 hours and how completely the geometry of her life had rearranged itself. And she felt something that was not quite fear and not quite grief and not quite anger, but contained elements of all three in roughly equal proportion, which was a feeling she recognized because it was the feeling she'd had at 7 years old when she understood for the first time that her deafness was not a temporary condition, and at 10 years old when she understood that her mother's particular form of absence was also not temporary, the feeling of a permanent thing becoming permanent. She stood up. She smoothed the cot blanket. She picked up her go bag and put it on her back out of habit. The habit of having it ready, the habit that was older than this situation by years. She went out to find Burklaw. He was alone in the main bar. The other men had gone or were elsewhere in the building. She could feel the low-level vibration of presence in other rooms, the weight of occupied space. But the bar itself was empty except for him, sitting at the table nearest the door with his coffee and his phone face down and a road map that he'd been making marks on in pencil, the kind of marks that implied distances and timing and contingencies. He looked up when she came in. He looked at the go bag on her back. He looked at her face. He pointed at the chair across from him. She sat. He pushed the whiteboard across the table. He'd already written something. "I'm going to tell you everything. You deserve that. After that, we figure out the rest together. Okay?" She read it. Wrote, "Okay." He wrote for a while. She watched his hand move across the board, the deliberate quality of a man who chose his words carefully, not from evasiveness, but from the precision of someone who had learned that imprecise words created problems, that precise words didn't. He wrote in sections, pausing between them. The first section. The Iron Crusaders have been trying to take over the Nevada Independent Chapter Network for 2 years. They're not a traditional MC. They're funded from outside. We think organized crime. We think it goes higher than Nevada, but we haven't confirmed how high. They don't want territory for the territory. They want territory for what moves through it. She read it. He watched her absorb it. She wrote, "What moves through it?" He wrote, "Weapons, possibly people. We're not certain on the second part." She sat with that. He continued writing. "We've been building a case to hand to the FBI for 6 months. Information gathered slowly, carefully. 3 of our people died getting parts of it. The attack Tuesday was their response to finding out we were close." She read it, wrote, "They knew you were building a case." He wrote, "Someone told them." She looked at that for a long time. Wrote, "Someone inside?" He looked at her. His pale eyes were completely still. He wrote, "We think so." Yes. The room felt different after she read that. The quality of the silence changed, not the comfortable silence of a space at rest, but the taut, specific silence of a wire under tension. She wrote, "Who?" He shook his head once, not refusing to answer, processing. He wrote, "We don't know yet. That's part of what makes the 50,000 dangerous. Whoever it is, they know our network. They know our safe locations. If they're still inside, any place we put you could be compromised." She stared at the words. The go bag suddenly felt heavier on her back. The logic of it assembled itself in her head with the same methodical clarity she used for everything. Counting steps, counting markers, counting motorcycles in the parking lot. There was a person in this building, or connected to this building, who had been feeding information to the Iron Crusaders for months. 3 people were dead because of it. And now that same person knew about her, knew about the bounty, knew about every location Burklaw was currently considering for her safety. She wrote, "You told me so I'd understand why you can't just move me." He read it. Something moved through his face, the compression, the specific acknowledgement of a true thing landing where it was meant to land. He wrote, "I told you so you'd understand why I need you to trust me on the next part, even though I can't explain all of it yet." She wrote, "What's the next part?" He was writing his answer when the door opened. Well, Rowdy came in fast, the way he moved when the news was operational rather than conversational. The specific compressed energy of a man who had been running through the cold and was controlling the urgency in his body language by main force. He had mud on his boots, and his jacket collar was turned up against weather she hadn't registered coming in. He went directly to Burklaw and said something low, pointing back toward the door. Burklaw's face did not move, but his hand went flat on the table with the deliberateness that meant something. Donna materialized from the hallway. She'd been in the building the whole time, Ariel realized, positioned in the way of someone who had been standing close to the door for a reason. Burklaw looked at Ariel. He picked up the whiteboard and wrote quickly, "Stay here. Don't go near the windows." She wrote fast. "What happened?" He hesitated for just a moment. Then he wrote, "Someone tried to access the back room while you were in it, 40 minutes ago. Camera caught it. We're figuring out who." He took the whiteboard and went with Rowdy toward the back. Donna stayed. She stood near the bar with her arms crossed and her scarred arm against her chest, and her expression doing the specific work of someone who is managing multiple pieces of information simultaneously and not finding the process comfortable. She looked at Ariel and held up one finger. "Stay put." And then she moved to the window and looked through the edge of the curtain at the street outside. Ariel sat at the table with her go bag and the pencil-marked map and the cold remains of Burklaw's coffee, and she thought about the camera in the back hallway she hadn't known existed in the 40 minutes she'd been lying on the cot reading the same page. And she thought about what it meant that the person who'd tried that door had done it while she was on the other side of it and hadn't come through. Either they'd been interrupted, or they hadn't been trying to come through. They'd been confirming she was there. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of Ariel sitting at the table and Donna at the window and the building around them having the specific quality of a space where things were being determined in other rooms. And then Burklaw came back through the hallway door and behind him, between Rowdy and Cutter, who each had a hand on his arms in the way of men who are not restraining someone but are very clearly prepared to, was a man Ariel recognized. She had seen him at the table the morning after the attack. One of the men whose names she hadn't learned, whose cuts she hadn't read closely. Medium height, dark hair going gray at the temples, a face that had the kind of unremarkability that she now understood was not natural, but cultivated. He was not struggling. His face had the specific stillness of a man who had made certain calculations and arrived at the other side of them. Burklaw set the whiteboard on the table in front of Ariel. He wrote, "His name is Pell. He's been with us 4 years. His phone shows a call placed 45 minutes ago to a number that routes to the Crusaders' Western Nevada coordinator." She read it. She looked at Pell. He looked back at her with the cultivated, unremarkable face, and she thought, he doesn't feel guilty. Whatever he's feeling, it is not guilt. It was the face of a man who had made a decision and was standing behind it. Burklaw wrote, "He called in your location." She stared at those 4 words. Then she wrote, slowly, "To Tarvis." Burklaw looked at what she wrote. He wrote, "We think so." She looked at Pell again. She picked up the whiteboard and wrote something she had not planned to write, something that came from a place below planning. Why? She held it up for him to read. He looked at it. He looked at her. Something crossed his face that was not guilt and not remorse, but might have been the distant, complicated cousin of acknowledgement. He looked away. Cutter said something. Donna wrote it for Ariel. He said, "Doesn't matter why. What matters is they know where she is right now." Burklaw was already moving. He wrote fast and pushed the board to Ariel. We have maybe 2 hours before they decide whether to move on this location. You're leaving, now. Different location. Only Donna and I know it. Nobody else. She read it, wrote, "What about him?" She pointed at Pell. Burklaw read her question. He wrote, "That's handled." She wanted to write, "How?" She looked at his face and decided not to. She stood up with her go-bag. Atik. They went out through the back in Donna's truck, not Rowdy's. Donna drove without headlights for the first 3 blocks, which was either illegal or exactly the right call, depending entirely on what was waiting on the street out front. And then she pulled onto a side road that ran parallel to the highway heading north, and drove at a pace that was fast without being the specific speed of panic, which was itself a kind of information. Ariel sat in the passenger seat with her go-bag on her lap and the whiteboard, and she watched the dark Nevada flats scroll past, and thought about Pell's face. The cultivated unremarkability of it. 4 years. 4 years of sitting at tables and making marks on maps and being trusted with the specific kind of trust that operational proximity requires. And underneath it the whole time, the other thing. She wrote on the whiteboard and held it where Donna could see at the next pause. How long has he been working for them? Donna glanced at it. She kept her eyes on the road and reached for the board at a stop sign. She wrote, Griff thinks at least 18 months, maybe longer. Ariel read it, wrote, the 3 people who died getting information for the case. Donna read it while stopped. Her jaw tightened. She wrote back, probably, yes. Ariel stared at the word probably and felt the weight of it. She wrote, does Burklaw know that? That it was probably Pell? Donna looked at the board for a long time before writing. He knows. She pulled the truck back onto the road. They drove north for 40 minutes and then turned onto an unmarked 2-track that cut east into the flats, the truck's suspension working hard against the dry wash ruts, and eventually pulled up to a structure that resolved itself out of the dark as a low cinder block building with a corrugated metal roof and 2 garage doors, the kind of building that existed in this part of Nevada as either a legitimate workshop or a place deliberately constructed to look like one. Donna typed a code into a box at the side of the first garage door. The door went up. Inside 2 trucks, a workbench running the full length of the back wall, industrial lighting that came on automatically and was harsh and honest and revealed every surface in exact detail. The smell was oil and cold metal and the particular dryness of a space that was sealed against the desert climate. And a man standing at the workbench. Not one of the men from the bar. Someone new. Older. With a face that had the quality of a landscape that had been through weather for a very long time and had come out of it stripped to the essential geography. He wore a cut she didn't recognize, different patches, a top rocker she couldn't read at this distance. He looked at Donna. He looked at Ariel. He said something. Donna wrote, his name is Harker. He's from the Arizona network. Griff called him tonight. Ariel looked at Harker. Wrote, does Griff trust him? Donna read it. Something moved in her expression. She wrote, Griff would die for him. Ariel considered that. It was a specific kind of endorsement. She went in. Harker made coffee on a single-burner camp stove that sat on one end of the workbench, which struck Ariel as the most practical thing she'd seen in the last 24 hours. He did not make conversation. He made 3 cups, one for himself, one for Donna, one that he set on the workbench edge in front of the stool where Ariel was sitting, and he went back to whatever he'd been doing at the far end of the bench, which appeared to involve the careful organization of documents into 2 piles that she didn't examine closely. Donna sat on an overturned crate with her own coffee and her phone and the expression of someone running multiple processes simultaneously. Ariel drank her coffee and looked at the garage door and thought. She thought about Pell. She thought about 4 years of proximity, of being trusted, of the specific access that trust created. She thought about the 3 people whose names she didn't know who had died getting pieces of a case together against the Iron Crusaders. She thought about the fact that Pell had called in her location 45 minutes after the bounty went out, which meant he'd received the bounty information through the Crusaders network within an hour of it being posted, which meant his access to their communications was real-time and current, which meant there might be others. She wrote on the whiteboard and pushed it along the bench toward Donna. Pell might not be the only one. Donna looked at it. She picked it up and looked at it for a long time. She wrote back, "Griff is looking at that right now." She wrote, "Looking how?" Donna, "Going back through everything that was compromised in the last 18 months, every safe house that got hit, every meeting that went wrong, looking for the pattern." Ariel, "If there's more than one, they know about this location too." Donna looked at her. She wrote, "No, this location has never been in our network documentation. Only Griff and I know it. We built it outside the normal system specifically because we didn't know where the leak was." Ariel read that. Wrote, "When did you build it?" Donna, 8 months ago. 8 months ago was roughly when Dale Pruitt had moved into her mother's trailer. She didn't write that connection down. She held it in her head and turned it and looked at it from several angles, and the geometry of it was uncomfortable in a specific way that meant it probably wasn't coincidence. She wrote, "My mother's boyfriend, Dale Pruitt. He knew about the anonymous tip before it was on the news. He had Crusaders contacts. He moved in 8 months ago." Donna read it slowly. She put the board down on the bench. She looked at Harker, who had stopped what he was doing and was looking at her. She picked up her phone. She typed and sent something. She wrote to Ariel, "I'm sending that to Griff now. Don't process it yet. We don't know what it means." Ariel, "I think I know what it means." Donna looked at her face. She wrote, "Tell me." Ariel wrote slowly, the letters more deliberate than usual. "My mother's boyfriend was placed. He wasn't a coincidence. Someone wanted someone close to me before this happened, which means they knew somehow that I was going to be relevant." Donna read it. The workbench light was harsh, and it showed everything on her face. The tightening, the thing behind her eyes that was anger and something more layered than anger. She wrote, "Or they wanted someone close to your mother's address, because your mother's address put someone 2 miles from this bar with eyes on the road." Ariel stared at that. She thought about Dale in the trailer for 8 months. The way he'd moved in, how quickly he'd established his particular gravitational field in those 4 rooms, the way her mother had oriented around him with the helpless precision of someone caught in a current. She thought about the times he'd been on his phone outside, which she'd noticed without noting, because she noticed everything without always processing what she was noting. 8 months of surveillance, of her walking that road every afternoon, of counting the motorcycles in the rusty chain lot, of understanding the shift patterns of the bar, of being positioned exactly where he needed to be. And then 5 men with rifles, and then Ariel seeing it, which had not been the plan. She wrote with a hand that was not quite steady. "I wasn't supposed to see them." Donna, "No." Ariel, "If I hadn't seen them, 30 people would be dead and nobody would know why." Donna looked at that for a long time. Then she wrote one sentence, and it was the sentence that broke something open in Ariel's chest in a way that she hadn't anticipated and couldn't immediately manage. "And you saw them because you walk that road every day, because going home is something you delay as long as possible." Ariel sat with that. The electric harshness of the garage light, the smell of cold oil, the thin ribbon of coffee steam from the cup in her hands. She had delayed going home because Dale was there. And because Dale was there, placed there, positioned there, she had walked past the gas station at exactly the right moment. The plan that was meant to destroy everything she'd been sitting in the periphery of for 8 months had been interrupted by its own architecture. She set down the coffee cup before she spilled it. Donna reached across the bench and put her hand over Ariel's. She didn't write anything. She just left her hand there, the scarred arm, the hand that had held the whiteboard every time Ariel needed a voice. And Ariel looked at it and felt the specific sensation of being held in place by another person's certainty at exactly the moment when her own had gone structurally unsound. The garage door vibrated. Both of them looked up. Harker was already moving. He killed the overhead light without breaking stride, and the garage went dark except for the faint emergency strip along the floor. And he was at the side window in 4 steps with a quality of motion that was completely unhurried and completely serious. He looked. He held up 2 fingers. 2 vehicles. Donna's hand tightened briefly on Ariel's and then released. She was on her feet and moving. She wrote fast in the near dark, illegible, and shoved the board at Ariel. Ariel held it at an angle to catch the floor strip light. under the second truck. Don't move until I come for you. No matter what. Ariel looked at the second truck. She looked at Donna's face. She went. The gap under the truck's frame was tight and smelled of road dirt and old grease, and she went in sideways with the go bag compressed against her chest, and she lay flat on the cold concrete floor, and she turned her head so she could see the garage door from the side. The door began to move. Not the one Donna had coded open. The other one, the second garage door, the one that had been closed the whole time, the one that Ariel had not seen anyone near. It was moving from the outside, rising slowly, and through the widening gap came the cold Nevada night and the wash of headlights from something parked outside, and the silhouette of a man. Then two men, then a third. Parker was behind the first truck with something in his hand that she didn't need to see clearly to understand. Donna was somewhere behind her. She couldn't see from this angle, couldn't risk moving to find a better one. The three men came into the garage, and the one in front, the one with the quality of the man in charge, the one whose posture communicated the particular authority of someone who was accustomed to walking into rooms and having the rooms reorganize around him, stopped 6 feet inside the door and looked around the empty lit space with the specific thoroughness of a man who was checking work rather than discovering something new. He looked at Harker's truck. He looked at Donna's truck. He looked at the workbench with its 2 piles of documents and the cold camp stove and 3 coffee cups. 3 cups. Ariel watched his eyes find the cups and do the math. He said something. She couldn't hear it. She watched his mouth. From under the truck, she could see his boots, well made, the kind of tactical footwear that cost money. She could see the boots of the 2 men flanking him. She could see the leading edge of what one of them was carrying at his side. The man in front crouched down. He crouched down and looked directly under the truck. And Ariel Brooks, lying flat on cold concrete in a dark garage with everything she owned compressed against her chest, looked directly into the face of a man she had never seen before, but who was looking at her with the same expression Tarvis had used outside the bar. The professional zero-heat expression of a man looking at a coordinate rather than a person. And she understood, with the absolute clarity of a system reaching its final calculation, that the man looking at her was not Tarvis. He was someone above Tarvis. He was someone who had come himself rather than sending others, because $50,000 was not a message about money, it was a message about priority. And this, she, 12 and a half years old and pressed flat against cold concrete, was currently the priority. He reached under the truck with one long arm, and the garage erupted. Not weapons. Not the sudden violence she was bracing for. The overhead lights slammed on at full industrial brightness, and every door in the structure opened simultaneously, and the sound, she couldn't hear it, but she felt it, felt the concussive quality of it through the concrete floor, felt the vibration of multiple engines, and the percussion of boots, and the specific heavy kinetic pressure of a space suddenly full of moving bodies, arrived from every direction at once. The man's arm retracted. He stood up. Ariel stayed under the truck. She lay there with her cheek against the concrete and her go bag against her chest, and she felt through the floor what was happening in the room above her. The weight distribution of men taking specific positions, the controlled shift of authority from one configuration to another, the thing that happened in a space when the balance of force tipped, and everyone in the room knew it at the same moment. Then boots she recognized crouched down next to the truck. Donna's face appeared at floor level. She had a light. She shone it on the whiteboard she'd already written on and held it up for Ariel to read. "It's okay. Come out. Griff is here." Ariel looked at the words. She looked past Donna at the boots in the room, the multiple pairs, the specific configuration of people standing in the way they stood when the situation had been resolved, rather than when it was still active. She looked at the 3 cups on the workbench. She looked at the documents in 2 piles. She had been told this location was known only to Burklaw and Donna. She had been told it had been kept outside the network specifically because they didn't know where the leak was. And the man had walked directly to the second garage door with a code she didn't know Donna had given him. She wrote on the whiteboard, pressed flat against the concrete, and held it up for Donna. The words were very small and very clear. How did they find this place? Donna read it. She watched Donna's face do something that it had not done in all of the previous hours. Not the anger, not the weariness, not the managed control of multiple simultaneous operational concerns. Something underneath those things. Something that was older and had been there the whole time and had just, in the specific light of Ariel's question, become impossible to keep below the surface. Donna didn't write anything back, and the silence that she didn't write anything into was the worst answer Ariel had received in her entire life, because it meant that Donna didn't know either, or that she did, and the knowing had just arrived at this exact moment through the same question, and the shape of the thing they were both now looking at was a shape that neither of them had been prepared. The answer came from Burklaw. He was standing 6 feet inside the garage with mud on his jacket, and his eyes doing the thing she'd learned to read. Not the compression, not the controlled stillness, something rawer than those, something that had been stripped of its management layer by whatever had happened between the bar and this building in the last 2 hours. He looked at Donna first, a long look, the kind that communicated a complete exchange of information between two people who had been reading each other for long enough that language was redundant. Then he looked at the man who had crouched under the truck. The man was standing now, flanked by Rowdy and a biker she didn't know, neither of them touching him, but both of them positioned in the specific way that made touching unnecessary. He was perhaps 50, dressed for cold weather, with the face of someone who had made peace with being looked at the way people were currently looking at him. Not defiant, not broken. Somewhere between them, in the territory of a man who had arrived at the end of a long road and found the last mile exactly as difficult as he'd expected. Burklaw walked to the workbench. He picked up the whiteboard. He wrote without sitting down and brought it to Ariel, who was still on the floor next to the truck because nobody had told her to stand, and standing felt like a decision that required more information than she currently had. His name is Carver. He was FBI 6 years ago. He's been embedded with the Crusaders for 8 months as an independent contractor. They don't know his real name. They think he's freelance security. He came here tonight because the second door code was in the information I gave the Bureau 3 weeks ago as a test. He's the test. She read it twice. She wrote FBI gave the code to the Crusaders. He read her words. His jaw tightened. He wrote, "Someone inside the Bureau did. We don't know who yet. We know it went out because Carver is here." She looked at Carver. She looked at his boots, the tactical footwear that cost money, that she'd been looking at from the floor 30 seconds ago. She wrote, "He's not here to hurt me." Burklaw, "No. He came ahead to warn us. He burned his cover to do it." She absorbed that, the shape of it. A man who had spent 8 months building an identity inside a violent organization and had burned it in a single night to tell them the door code had been compromised. She thought about what 8 months cost. She thought about what burning it cost more. She wrote, "Why?" Burklaw looked at the question. He looked at Carver. He wrote back slowly, "Ask him yourself." He helped her up from the floor. Not dramatically, just a hand, brief, functional, the way he did everything. She stood up with the go bag and the whiteboard, and she walked to where Carver was standing, and she held up the board with its single word. "Why?" Carver looked at it. He looked at her. He reached for the whiteboard, and she let him take it, and he wrote in the handwriting of a man who hadn't done this in a while. Cramped, slightly off the horizontal, deeply certain. "Because I have a daughter. She's 14. And I've been watching this situation develop for 8 months, and I know what Tarvis does to soft targets, and I decided I was done being the kind of man who lets the math work out without doing anything about it." She read it. She looked at his face. She wrote, "Thank you." He read it. He handed the board back and looked away, which was the expression of a man receiving something he wasn't comfortable receiving, which she understood because she was also uncomfortable receiving things and recognized the particular body language of it. Burklaw's hand appeared in her peripheral vision, flat on the workbench, requesting attention. She looked at him. He was already writing. "We have about 6 hours. Carver says Tarvis is mobilizing 3 cells for a coordinated operation tomorrow before dawn. The bar, Donna's house, and the school. Simultaneously. He thinks if he creates enough chaos fast enough, the bounty situation resolves itself in the confusion." She read it, wrote, "What do we do?" Burklaw looked at the question. He looked at the room. Donna, Harker, Rowdy, Carver, the 2 men she didn't know. He looked at the map on the workbench with its pencil marks and its distances and its contingencies. He wrote, We don't wait for morning. They left in 3 vehicles at 2:17 a.m. The cold had come down hard in the last hour. The specific Nevada cold that arrived without wind, just a drop in temperature so complete and immediate that the air felt pressurized by it. Ariel's breath was visible in the garage and more visible outside, where the desert flats stretched out in the dark with the quality of a space that had no mercy in either direction. She was in Donna's truck, go bag between her feet, whiteboard in her lap. Donna drove with both hands on the wheel and the heater going and her eyes on the 2-track ahead. She hadn't spoken, written, anything unnecessary in the last 40 minutes. The quality of her silence was operational, not closed off, not processing, just directed. The silence of a woman who had put everything non-essential down and was carrying only what the next 6 hours required. At the junction where the 2-track met the county road, 3 motorcycles were waiting, not running, engines off, sitting in the dark with their riders in the specific posture of people who had been there long enough to go still. As Donna's truck slowed, one of them turned a light on briefly, a flashlight directed at the ground, a signal, and then off. Donna wrote without looking away from the junction. Arizona Network. Parker called them in at midnight, 8 more coming from California. Ariel. How many total? Donna. By 4 a.m., around 60. 60. She sat with that number. 60 people who had driven through cold Nevada night on the word of one phone call, because the architecture of obligation and loyalty that connected them was older and more structural than anything the Iron Crusaders had built in 2 years of violence. She wrote, "They know it's for me." Donna looked at the board at the junction stop. She wrote, "They know a 12-year-old kid ran 3 miles on burning pavement to warn 30 strangers. That's what they know." The motorcycles pulled out ahead of them. Their taillights moved through the dark like a slow-moving constellation, and Donna followed. The bar looked different at 3 in the morning. The neon sign was off, but the parking lot lights were on, and the lot itself, usually holding 14 bikes on a busy night, was filling with a density of machinery that changed the character of the place entirely. Chrome and leather, and the subdued rumble of engines being cut one after another, each silence adding to the collective weight of the assembly. Men and women climbing off bikes and moving toward the bar entrance with the unhurried purposefulness of people who had been briefed and were implementing. Ariel stood at the edge of the lot with Donna and watched it happen. She had never seen anything like it and suspected she never would again. This specific gathering, this specific convergence of people who had come from distance through cold and dark without hesitation, because the structure of who they were to each other required nothing less. She thought about the word family and how many definitions it had accumulated in her 12.5 years, and how all of them prior to the last 48 hours had been defined by absence rather than presence, by the shape of what wasn't there rather than what was. This was a different definition. Burklaw came out of the bar and stood at the entrance and looked across the lot. He looked at the bikes. He looked at the riders. He looked at Ariel. He walked to her. He had the whiteboard. He wrote, "I need you inside, back room, door locked. You don't open it for anyone except Donna or me. Understood?" She wrote, "I want to know what's happening." He read it. He wrote, "I'll tell you everything after. Right now I need to know you're behind a locked door." She looked at his face. The pale gray eyes were doing the thing that was not coldness, but its opposite. The specific intensity of someone who had compressed every available unit of attention into the present moment. She wrote, "Is Carver with you?" He, "Yes." She, "And the bureau contact and the compromised one." He paused. Wrote, "Carver gave us a name 2 hours ago. It's being handled by people above my level, above everyone's level. That part is out of our hands." She read that. Wrote, "But Tarvis doesn't know that yet." He looked at her. His expression shifted in a way she couldn't fully categorize, something between acknowledgement and the specific unease of a man who had just been handed back his own thinking by a 12-year-old. He wrote, "No, he doesn't." She wrote, "So he's still coming?" He, "Yes." She, "Then go." He read it. He looked at her for one additional second, and then he turned and went back to the bar entrance and the men who were waiting for him there. and Donna touched Ariel's shoulder and pointed toward the door, and Ariel went inside. The back room was the same cot, the same electric radiator, the same paperback novel with the broken spine. She didn't lie down. She sat on the floor with her back against the cot and her go-bag in her lap and the whiteboard against her knees, and she thought. The floor vibrated, not randomly, in patterns. The rhythm of boots moving with urgency, the particular cadence of a space being organized for a specific purpose. Occasionally a heavier vibration that she identified as the bar's front door opening and closing as more people came in. Once a sustained low-frequency rumble that built and peaked and receded, a convoy arriving, she thought, bikes in a group, the engine sound stacking into something felt rather than heard. She counted the patterns the way she counted everything. She thought about Tarvis's 3 simultaneous targets: the bar, Donna's house, the school. She thought about the logic of it. 3 points, simultaneous, designed to create a chaos response that split the defense and prevented concentration of force. She thought about the fact that she was in the bar, which was one of the 3 targets, which meant the people out front were not just assembling to go somewhere. They were assembling to hold something. She thought about 60 people in the cold. She thought about the man named Carver, who had burned 8 months of embedded work to come to a garage and tap on a door before the people he was supposed to be working for could use a stolen door code. She thought about his handwriting on the whiteboard. Because I have a daughter. The floor vibrated differently. A specific pattern she recognized as the communications room, the one with the wall panel and the radios and the laptop. Multiple people in it, the weight of concentrated activity. She reached into her go-bag and took out the $43 in small bills and counted them for something to do with her hands. $43. 3 backup markers. Library card. Rolled clothes. 2 granola bars that were probably a year old. The complete inventory of everything she'd believed she had. She put the money back. Keek. Donna came for her at 4:45 a.m. She came through the door fast, and the quality of her movement communicated something had changed. Not the operational efficiency of earlier, but the urgent, controlled energy of someone responding to a development that had arrived ahead of schedule. She wrote immediately, not sitting down. Tarvis moved early. 1 cell hit a safe house on the south side 20 minutes ago. Nobody was there. We'd already cleared it. But it means he's running ahead of his own timeline. Griff thinks he got nervous. Ariel. Nervous why? Donna. Carver. He hasn't checked in on the Crusaders network. They know he went dark. Tarvis knows something changed. Ariel. So he's accelerating. Donna. Yes, the school team is already in position. Donna's house has been empty since midnight. That leaves here. She looked at Donna. She wrote, How many? Donna. Carver estimates 2 vehicles, 8 to 10 men. They're not expecting what's in this parking lot. Ariel. When? Donna looked at her phone. She wrote, Griff thinks within the hour. Ariel sat with that. 1 hour. She looked around the back room, the cot, the radiator, the shelf with the manuals. She looked at the window with its heavy curtain and its functional lock. She wrote, I want to see. Donna. No. Ariel. I need to see. Donna looked at her. Ariel held her gaze and didn't look away, and after a moment Donna wrote, 5 minutes, then back in here. Non-negotiable. They went out. The bar's main room had been transformed in the hours since she'd last seen it. Tables pushed back, the floor clear. Men positioned along the walls and near every window with the kind of stillness that was not passivity, but its opposite. The coiled, directed stillness of people who had been in this configuration before and knew exactly what it was for. She recognized Rowdy near the front window. Harker at the bar itself, which struck her as the most Harker thing she'd seen him do. Cutter by the door, his face arranged into the blunt, honest expression she'd come to associate with him when he was done doing anything other than the thing directly in front of him. And Burklaw at the center of it, not directing it. It didn't need direction, but inhabiting it. The gravity thing she'd noticed the first day. The way everything in a room organized around him without his having to ask. He saw her come in with Donna. His expression did not change, but his eyes tracked her to the near wall, where Donna put her hand on her shoulder and held her there. And then he looked back at the window. The lot outside was full. She couldn't see all of them from here, but she knew from the counting she'd done on the walk from the back. 63 bikes in the lot. She'd gotten to 63 before Donna moved her inside, which meant 63 riders who were currently either in this building or positioned in the surrounding perimeter in ways she couldn't see but could infer from the vibrations in the floor. She thought about what it looked like from the outside. From Tarvis's position, approaching with 8 to 10 men in 2 vehicles, expecting a bar. Finding 63. The floor vibrated in a new way. She felt Donna's hand tighten on her shoulder 1 increment. Burklaw's hand came up, flat, palm back. Hold. The room went from still to something that had no useful word, a density of readiness that was physical in character, that she could feel through the soles of her shoes on the wooden floor, that made the air in the room feel pressurized. She watched the front window. 2 sets of headlights appeared on the highway, moving slow, very slow. The specific slow of vehicles that were looking at something and adjusting to what they were seeing. They stopped on the road. The headlights stayed on. Nobody in the bar moved. The 2 vehicles sat on the highway for a long time. She counted, couldn't stop counting, got to 47 seconds. And then something happened that she could read even through glass and distance. The quality of the headlights changed. They sat differently. Rowdy made a gesture she couldn't read. Burklaw turned and looked at Cutter. Something passed between them. The headlights began moving again, not forward, not the parking lot. They moved away, down the highway, east, away from town, accelerating now from the slow reconnaissance pace to something faster, and the taillights receded and disappeared, and the highway was empty. Donna let out a breath against Ariel's hair that communicated 3 months of operational tension in the specific way that released breath communicates things that words can't. But Burklaw was not releasing anything. He turned to Rowdy. He spoke briefly. Rowdy was on a radio immediately, low and controlled. Parker moved from the bar toward the back. Cutter opened the front door and looked at the lot, and made a hand signal to the perimeter she couldn't see. She wrote on her whiteboard and held it up where Burklaw could see. They left. "Why are you still?" He crossed the room in 8 steps, read the board, wrote back immediately. They pulled back. They're not done. They're regrouping. 8 men in 2 vehicles does not drive away when they're carrying a $50,000 objective. They pulled back to reposition. She read it, wrote, "Reposition where?" He looked at her. He wrote 1 word, "Everywhere." And then every radio in the building activated simultaneously. She couldn't hear the words, but she felt the room change in an instant. Everybody in it reorienting, the quality of the motion shifting from hold and wait to something with a different direction. And Donna's hand came off her shoulder as Donna moved to Burklaw. And Burklaw was writing on the whiteboard with the fast, jagged writing he used for urgency, and he shoved it at Ariel and turned away before she'd finished reading it. South perimeter. They split up. 3 going around the back of the building. Go with Rowdy. Now. Rowdy was already at her side. They went down the hallway toward the back, past the communications room where 2 men she didn't know were bent over the laptop with controlled urgency, past the room with the cot and the radiator, toward the back exit she'd used the morning after Dale was arrested. Rowdy pushed the door open 3 inches and looked through it with the specific care of a man checking angles rather than just distance. He held up a fist. Wait. He looked for 5 seconds. He opened the door fully and they went through. The back of the bar faced a narrow alley with a chain-link fence, and beyond it the backs of the commercial properties on the next street. The cold hit her with total commitment. The 4 a.m. Nevada cold that had no diplomacy in it, that went through her hoodie as if it wasn't there. Her breath was a hard cloud. Rowdy pushed her against the back wall of the bar, himself beside her, and looked left down the alley. She looked right. There was a man at the end of the alley to her right, 40 feet away, moving in the specific crouched configuration of someone trying to cover ground quietly. He hadn't seen them yet. He was focused on the bar's back door. She grabbed Rowdy's arm. He looked. He looked at her. He put his finger against his lips, and she almost wanted to tell him that this particular instruction was genuinely unnecessary. And then he was making a signal with his hand, and 2 shapes detached from the fence line to her left that she had not seen and would not have seen if they hadn't moved. 2 of their own, positioned and waiting. and they moved toward the crouching man with the absolute silence of people who had been doing this in various forms for long enough that they had stopped making noise as a matter of basic competence. It was over in seconds. She looked away. When she looked back, the alley was clear and Rowdy was checking his radio with the expression of a man receiving multiple updates simultaneously and triaging them. He wrote fast on the board. 2 more on the south fence, handled. Third vehicle, they had a third vehicle, went for the back of the school. She wrote, the school is clear. People are there. It's okay, but it means they had more than Carver knew about. She, how much more? He looked at her. He wrote, working on that. His radio vibrated again. He read whatever came through it. His expression did something she hadn't seen on his face before, something that moved through the control layer and briefly made it to the surface. She wrote, what? Not a question, a demand. He wrote, one of theirs got into the building, not here, the school, through a service entrance. There's a kid. He stopped writing. He looked at his radio. He looked at Ariel. He wrote, not you. Another kid. A girl. She was there early. A student. His radio vibrated again and he read it and his expression cleared fractionally. The specific clearing of information resolving an unknown variable. She's okay. Our people had her. She's okay. Ariel stood in the cold alley and felt the specific relief of that. The physical sensation of a weight that had loaded into her chest in the 5 seconds between a kid and she's okay releasing back out. She wrote, how did they know there'd be a kid at the school at 4 a.m.? Rowdy read it. He wrote, they didn't. She was sleeping there. Janitor's closet. Apparently she does it sometimes. She stared at that. A girl sleeping in a janitor's closet at school because somewhere at home the alternative was worse. She knew that girl. She didn't know her name, had never spoken to her, had no face to put to the fact of her, but she knew the architecture of that choice, the specific math of it, the way a locked closet in a building full of people who didn't know you were there was safer than certain kinds of home. She knew it the way she knew 3 backup markers and a go bag and a window she'd spent 2 years working loose. Rowdy touched her arm. They went back inside. The bar smelled like cold air and effort. The quality of the lighting had changed. The overhead was on full, stripping everything of shadow, and in that light she could see what the last hour had done to the people in the room. The specific exhaustion that lived on the other side of sustained high-stakes readiness, when the body has spent everything it had and is now running on something older and less renewable than adrenaline. Burklaw was at the bar. He had his coffee. He had a small cut above his left eye that had been cleaned but not closed. She didn't know when that had happened, and she wasn't going to ask because it would mean him writing reassurances that neither of them had the patience for. He pushed the whiteboard to her when she sat on the stool. He'd written, 6 detained, 2 vehicles impounded. Tarvis wasn't with them. She read it, wrote, where is he? That's the question. She, Carver? He, with our people at the South Compound, talking to county. Federal involvement kicks in at 7 a.m. when the bureau contact gets arrested in Reno. She, they found him that fast? He, Carver had documentation, had it for 3 months, was waiting for the right moment. This was it. She looked at her hands on the bar top. The cut across 3 fingers was healing, the tape slightly dirty from the last 48 hours. She wrote, it's almost over. He read it. He looked at her. He wrote back, and the writing was slower than the operational writing, more like the first writing, the deliberate chosen words writing from the beginning. Almost. Tarvis is still out. Until he's in custody, the 50,000 stands. We stay together until he's found. She, how long? He looked at the question for a moment. Then he wrote, however long it takes. She looked at that, at the simplicity of it, the specific uncomplicated weight of it, however long it takes, offered not as reassurance or optimism or the performed confidence of someone who needed her to feel better, offered as information, as fact. She wrote, okay. He drank his coffee. She sat with hers. The bar was filling back up with people coming in from the cold, from the perimeter, from the alley, from wherever the last 2 hours had put them. And the room had the specific quality of the aftermath of a thing, the checking of each other, the particular physical inventory that people take of one another after shared danger, the short exchanges that communicated you're here, and I know in whatever compressed language the situation offered. She watched it. She felt the floor vibrating with 63 returned riders and the weight of every decision that had brought each of them here in the cold before dawn. And she thought about being invisible and about being seen and about the specific difference between those two states and how quickly one became the other when the circumstances removed the option of the first. Donna sat next to her. She wrote without preamble. The girl at the school. She's here now. In the back. Shaken up, but okay. Ariel. Is there someone with her? Donna. Yes. Ariel. Someone who knows what to do with a kid who sleeps in a janitor's closet? Donna read it. She looked at Ariel's face. She wrote, I'm going to go do that now. She went. Ariel was alone at the bar with her coffee and the cut above Burklaw's eye, and the whiteboard, and the early morning settling over the lot full of bikes outside. And she thought about Tarvis, somewhere in the Nevada dark, having made a calculation and not been willing to execute it personally, having sent others and watched them not come back, knowing by now that the math had changed and not knowing yet by how much. She thought about what a man like that did when his math stopped working. She thought about the school and the bar and Donna's house and the 3 targets and the fact that all 3 had been covered and all 3 had held. She wrote on the whiteboard and put it on the bar in front of her without showing it to anyone, just sitting with it, looking at her own words. What is the one thing we haven't covered? She looked at it. She thought about everything she'd been told in the last hour. The 6 detained, the 2 vehicles. Tarvis not among them. Carver at the South Compound. Federal machinery activating at 7 a.m. The bureau contact being arrested in Reno. The girl from the janitor's closet, here now, in the back room. Her room, the one with the cot. The back room. She sat very still. She thought about Pell and the camera and the call placed 45 minutes after the bounty went out. She thought about the garage and the second door and Carver's handwriting. I have a daughter. She thought about the compromised bureau contact and the door code that had traveled through a chain of people between when Donna said it and when Carver used it. She thought about information, about how it moved, about the specific, consistent question of how each new location had been found, the trailer's street, the garage, and now the school. She picked up the whiteboard. She erased what she'd written. She wrote something else and looked at it and felt the cold in her chest that was not the Nevada night outside, but something internal, something that had assembled itself in the last 30 seconds from pieces she'd been holding separately without understanding they were parts of the same thing. She looked at Burklaw. He was watching her. He'd been watching her think. She could see it. The particular quality of attention of a man who respected process and didn't interrupt it. She held up the board. He read it. His face went through the compression thing and passed it into something she'd never seen on it before. A kind of stillness that was not controlled, not managed, not the professional flatness of a man who had learned to operate below the surface of what he was feeling. This was a stillness that arrived from impact. The specific quality of a man who had just read something that had hit the structural load-bearing part of his understanding of the last 48 hours. Her whiteboard said, how did they know there was a kid sleeping at the school? They went there with a plan to use her. They went there knowing she'd be there. Someone told them. Someone who knew about a kid who sleeps in janitor's closets. Someone who had access to that information. Someone we brought in tonight. Someone we told about this girl in this building 2 hours ago before we put her in the back room. Burklaw set down his coffee cup with a precision that was the opposite of casual. He stood up. He walked to the hallway door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. He turned back to Ariel, and his face was doing something she had no full vocabulary for. Something that lived at the intersection of operational fury and the specific devastation of a betrayal that was not abstract or organizational, but personal, intimate, the kind that lived in the body rather than the mind. He wrote one word on the whiteboard and held it up. Parker. And before she could write anything back, he was through the door and down the hallway, and the floor under her feet was vibrating with his footsteps, and then with other footsteps converging from other directions. and the bar behind her erupted in the specific motion of a room full of people responding to a thing that everyone had just understood at the same moment. And somewhere down that hallway, in the back room where the cot was, and the electric radiator was, and the girl from the janitor's closet was, a door was opening that should not have been. The door was open 4 inches. Ariel was off the bar stool before she'd made a conscious decision to move, the go bag swinging against her hip, the whiteboard in her hand, moving down the hallway with the specific urgency of someone who had been running toward things instead of away from them for 3 days now, and had apparently decided that was just who she was. The hallway was narrow and bright, and at the end of it the back room door stood open and the light from the electric radiator was the only light inside, and in that light she could see 2 things simultaneously. The girl from the janitor's closet sitting on the cot with her knees pulled to her chest and her eyes very wide and fixed on the far corner of the room, and Harker standing between the cot and the window with his jacket on and his hand on the window latch, and the expression of a man who had run the numbers and found them no longer in his favor but was not yet done running them. Burklaw was in the doorway ahead of Ariel. He was not moving fast. He was moving the way he moved through everything, with the gravitational certainty of a man who had already determined the outcome and was now simply arriving at it. He filled the doorway completely. He put one hand on the frame. Harker looked at him. The thing about Harker's face in that moment was that it was not the face of a man caught doing something he was ashamed of. It was the face of a man caught doing something he had decided to do and was standing behind, which was in some ways considerably worse. He looked at Burklaw the way a man looks at a debt he has spent a long time knowing was coming due. He said something. Ariel couldn't read it fully. The angle, the light. But she caught. Griff. Just the name. The way you said someone's name when you wanted the weight of it to carry what you couldn't put into words. Burklaw said something back, short. She caught nothing except the quality of it, which was very quiet and very final. Rowdy appeared behind Ariel and moved past her, going into the room and positioning himself between Harker and the window with the efficiency of someone who had been told one thing and was doing that one thing without editorializing. Harker's hand came off the window latch. He sat down on the floor. Just sat down, not dropped, not collapsed, just lowered himself to the floor with the specific deliberateness of a man choosing the posture of a man who is done, and put his back against the wall and looked at his own hands. The girl on the cot was shaking, not violently. The small, continuous tremor of a body that had been afraid for a sustained period and had not yet received permission to stop. She was maybe 13, with the look of someone who had been thin for a long time and had arranged herself to take up as little space as possible, which Ariel recognized with the recognition that lived below the level of thought. She went to the cot. She sat next to the girl, not touching, not crowding, just adjacent, and she held up the whiteboard where the girl could see it, and she wrote, "My name is Ariel. I'm 12. Are you hurt?" The girl looked at the board. She looked at Ariel. She shook her head. Ariel wrote, "Okay, you're okay. Nobody's going to touch you." The girl read it. The shaking didn't stop, but something in her face shifted. The specific shift of someone receiving information they want to believe and are beginning to allow themselves to. Ariel stayed where she was. Behind her, she felt the room continuing its work. Burklaw and Harker having whatever exchange needed to happen, Rowdy in his position, the hallway filling with 1 or 2 others who'd come at the sound of things resolving. She didn't turn to look. She stayed beside the girl on the cot, and she held the whiteboard in her lap, and she breathed. And after a while, the girl's shaking slowed and then stopped. And she looked at Ariel with eyes that were dark and exhausted and said something. Ariel pointed to her own ear and shook her head once. The girl looked at her. Then she wrote something in the air with her finger, uncertain, tentative, and Ariel held up the whiteboard and the marker, and the girl took them and wrote, in the cramped handwriting of someone who wasn't used to being given the floor, "My name is Sage." Ariel read it. She took the board back and wrote, "Hi, Sage." She handed it back. Sage looked at it for a long moment. Then she wrote, "Is it over?" Ariel took the board. She thought about the honest answer to that. Tarvis, still out there, the 50,000 still technically active, the federal machinery grinding toward its 7 a.m. activation. She thought about Harker on the floor. She thought about Pell. She thought about everything that was still unresolved and everything that had just shifted permanently in the last 3 minutes. She wrote, "The worst part is," Sage read it. She looked at Ariel's face. She nodded like someone who understood that was the most honest answer available and was choosing to take it. Harker talked. Not to Ariel. She wasn't in the room for that part. Had taken Sage out to the bar and gotten her coffee and crackers and the particular status of someone under Donna's active attention, which meant nobody in the building was going to be anything other than functionally competent in her vicinity. She knew Harker talked because Burklaw told her afterward in the deliberate whiteboard writing of a man choosing exactly which information a 12-year-old needed to have. The shape of it was this: Harker had been compromised 2 years ago. Not through ideology, not through greed in any simple form, but through the specific devastating leverage of a person in danger. His son, it turned out, caught in a debt situation with people connected to the Iron Crusaders' financial network. The choice had been made the way those choices were always made. In the dark, in a moment of desperation, with the full intention of it being temporary. And then the temporary had extended itself the way it always did. He had not given them the garage code directly. He had given them the document that contained it without knowing it contained it, which was a distinction that had exactly zero functional consequence for the people whose safety had depended on that document staying where it belonged. Burklaw wrote, "He didn't know about you specifically. Didn't know about the bounty until tonight. When he did, he tried to get Sage out the window." Ariel read that. She sat with it for a while. She wrote, "To protect her." He. Yes. She. That doesn't make the other part not happen. He looked at her. He wrote, "No, it doesn't. It." She looked at the word "no" on the whiteboard and thought about the specific weight of it, the willingness to not soften it, to not add something that would give the complexity somewhere easier to land. She thought about what it cost a man to write that about someone he had trusted for however long he'd trusted Harker. She wrote, "His son. Is he okay?" Burklaw looked at the question. Something crossed his face that she was learning to read as the expression he wore when a piece of information arrived that had a particular emotional cost, and he was absorbing that cost in real time. He wrote, "We're working on it." She. "Okay." He looked at her. He wrote, "You keep saying that." She. "It's true every time." He held the whiteboard for a moment and then set it down and picked up his coffee, which was cold, and drank it anyway. Tarvis was arrested at 6:41 a.m., not in Cinder Valley. 40 miles east, at a highway motel, by state police acting on information provided by Carver through a contact that bypassed the compromised bureau channel entirely and went directly to a federal prosecutor in Las Vegas who had been building a parallel case for 14 months and had been waiting for exactly this kind of direct evidentiary connection. Ariel learned about it from Rowdy, who wrote it on the whiteboard without preamble or ceremony, which was exactly the right register for it. She read it. She looked at the word arrested. She looked at Tarvis. She wrote, "The bounty. Rowdy, gone. His network is collapsing." 3 other cells picked up in the last 2 hours. The money was contingent on him being operational. She looked at that, at the specific mechanics of a $50,000 threat evaporating in the hour before dawn because the infrastructure beneath it had been systematically dismantled by 63 people in leather cuts who had driven through cold Nevada dark on one phone call. She wrote, "Is it really over?" Rowdy read it. He thought about it with the seriousness of a man who didn't give false reassurances, which she had come to understand was one of the most reliable things about him. He wrote, "The legal part keeps going for a while. Trials, federal investigation, the compromised bureau contact. That's going to be loud and it's going to take time. But the part where someone is actively trying to find you, yes, that's done." She looked at "that's done." She had been carrying the weight of the last 3 days in her chest in a configuration that had become so familiar in 72 hours that she'd stopped registering it as weight, just as the new shape of the space inside her. She became aware of it now only because it was changing. Not disappearing, changing, becoming something that had edges she could locate, that was specific and contained rather than ambient and total. She wrote, "Okay." Rowdy looked at it. He looked at her face. He wrote, "You're going to stop saying that eventually. She. Probably not. He looked at that for a moment, and then he did something she had not seen him do in 3 days of consistent proximity. The corner of his mouth moved. Barely. The absolute minimum expenditure of a smile from a man who had decided long ago that smiling was a resource to be conserved. She looked at it and thought, I'm going to remember that. Donna found her at 6:58 a.m., sitting on the back step of the bar in the cold, watching the desert go from dark to gray to the first thin edge of actual light along the eastern ridge. She sat next to her. For a while, neither of them communicated anything. The desert was very quiet at this hour. She couldn't hear it, never could, but she knew its quality of silence from the way it looked, from the stillness of the creosote and the total absence of motion in the flat distance. A sky going from black to deep blue to something that would be orange in 20 minutes. Donna wrote eventually and held the board between them. How are you? Not a question mark. An observation looking for a response. Ariel thought about it honestly. She wrote, tired, not the kind that sleeping fixes. Donna, no, not yet. That kind takes longer. Ariel looked at the horizon. She wrote, Sage. What happens to her? Donna, we're figuring that out. She has a situation at home that's being looked at. Nobody's sending her back to something that puts her in a janitor's closet. Ariel, who's looking at it? Donna, people who owe us a very large favor as of this morning. She thought about that. The specific machinery of obligation that had been generated in the last 72 hours. The federal prosecutor, the state police, the documented cooperation, the operational intelligence that had taken down 4 Crusader cells in a single night. She thought about what that machinery could do, directed at a 13-year-old girl's home situation by people who were very motivated to be seen as grateful. She wrote, good. Donna looked at the word. She wrote, you know you're going to have to talk to someone official today. Your mother, county, formal statements about Dale and the bar. Ariel, I know. Donna, it's going to be uncomfortable. Ariel, everything is uncomfortable. I'm used to it. Donna read it. She wrote, you shouldn't have to be used to it. Ariel looked at that for a while. She wrote, no, but I am. That's different from it being okay. Donna was quiet for a moment with that, absorbing it the way she absorbed things. She wrote, that's an old thought for someone your age. Ariel, I had a lot of time to think. Nobody talks to me. Donna read it. She wrote, I'm going to fix that. The specific weight of that sentence, the specific simplicity of it, delivered without caveat or condition, with the steadiness of a woman who said things she meant and meant things she said. Ariel, how? Donna looked at the horizon for a moment. The light was changing. The orange was beginning, low and clean along the ridge line. She wrote more slowly than usual. I had a daughter. Her name was Kira. She was 14 when she died. Car accident, 11 years ago. Not dramatic, not violent, just a wet road and bad timing, and the specific cruelty of a thing that has no reason. She paused. The marker rested against the board. Then she wrote, I'm not saying this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm saying it because you deserve to know why I'm not going to look at you and see a situation to be managed. I'm going to look at you and see a person who has been getting through things without any infrastructure for a very long time. And I would like, if you'll allow it, to be some of that infrastructure. Ariel read it. She read it 3 times. She looked at the scar on Donna's arm, the burn tissue from the wrist to the shoulder that she'd always worn pushed up and visible, the way of a woman who had made peace with being seen rather than seeing. She thought about Kira, 14 years old, a wet road, the specific cruelty of things that have no reason. She wrote, I'm not a replacement. Donna, no, you're Ariel, that's enough. She stared at that's enough until the words stopped being words and became something else. And then she put the whiteboard face down on the step and looked at the desert going orange and gold in the early light, and she let herself sit in the specific feeling of a person who has been told, for the first time in a life that has been mostly spent being told otherwise, that what they are is sufficient. She didn't cry. She wasn't a crier. But something happened in her chest that was the internal equivalent of a window opening in a room that had been sealed for a long time, and the air that came through it was cold and clean and necessary. She sat with it. Donna sat beside her. Well, the official part took most of the day. County social services. A meeting with a woman from the DA's office who had the specific careful manner of someone who had been briefed on a complicated situation and was doing her best to navigate it without making things worse. A statement about Dale, which she gave through Donna's translation in the clean, legible handwriting, covering the 8 months of his presence in the trailer, the text he'd shown her, the car with no plates, the way he'd looked at her when he said, "Your life in this town is going to get very small, very fast." Her mother arrived at 2 in the afternoon, not at the bar, at the county office where the meeting was happening. She came in with the look of a woman who had been sleeping and had been woken by a phone call that had required her to recalibrate everything she thought she knew about the last 24 hours, which was a recalibration that showed on her face as a complicated mixture of things that Ariel had learned long ago not to try to read too precisely, because precision in that direction tended to produce pain she didn't have immediate use for. Her mother was not a bad woman. This was the most accurate thing Ariel could say about her, and she had spent considerable time arriving at it. She was a woman who had been given a situation that exceeded her capacity and had managed it the only way she knew how, which was by reducing her field of engagement to the things she could handle and letting the things she couldn't handle exist at the edges of her attention without fully looking at them. Ariel had been at the edges for a long time. Her mother sat across from her at the county office table and looked at her with the expression of a woman who was seeing her daughter, actually seeing her, the specific focused attention of genuine looking, possibly for the first time in a long time. And what she saw was making her face do something complicated and effortful. She reached across the table. Ariel let her mother take her hand. She sat with the feeling of it, the specific texture of her mother's hand, which she knew completely and had known since she was very small, which was not nothing. It was not nothing at all. Her mother said something. Donna wasn't in the room. It was just the two of them for this part, deliberately. Ariel couldn't read it fully. She caught, "I didn't know." And, "I should have." And something after that she couldn't read because her mother looked away. Ariel wrote on the whiteboard and held it up. "I know." Her mother looked at it, looked at Ariel's face. Ariel wrote, "I'm going to stay with Donna for a while. I need you to say okay." Her mother read it. She was quiet for a long time. The specific quality of a person sitting with something they have been brought to the edge of and need to step over. Then she wrote back, slowly, with the pen from Ariel's whiteboard, on a piece of paper from the table, in handwriting that Ariel recognized from birthday cards and school absence notes. "Okay, if that's what you need. We'll figure the rest out." Ariel looked at it. She thought, "We'll figure the rest out" was not a promise, and not a plan, and not the beginning of a transformation. It was what it was. A woman who loved her imperfectly, saying okay when it mattered, which was not everything, but was not nothing. She folded the piece of paper and put it in her go-bag. Matt. Cinder Valley looked the same from the outside. She noticed this on the drive back from the county office. The same pawn shop, the same dollar store with the fluorescent light out on one side, the same park where nobody parked, the same highway shoulder she'd walked 4 years of afternoons across, the same dead Joshua trees leaning at their particular angles, the same western ridge going amber in the late afternoon, everything the same and nothing the same, which was the specific quality of having moved through something that changed the person doing the moving while leaving the geography untouched. She had read about this in books. She understood it differently now. Donna pulled into the rusty chain lot and parked, and they sat for a moment with the engine running. Donna wrote, "You okay?" Ariel looked at the bar. The neon sign, the R with its half-second stutter, was on in the late afternoon, doing its irregular heartbeat thing against the pale sky. The lot had fewer bikes than this morning. Some of the Arizona and California riders had left after the arrests, with the quiet efficiency of people who had come for a specific purpose and had no need to linger once it was done. But some were still there. 14 bikes, she counted automatically. Then 16. She wrote, "I keep thinking about the part where I ran toward it." Donna read it. She wrote, "What about it?" Ariel, "I didn't think about it. I just did it, and I don't know if that was brave or if I just..." didn't have anywhere else to go. Donna looked at that for a long time. She wrote, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've known a lot of people who did brave things. You know what most of them said after? Ariel. What? Donna. That they didn't have anywhere else to go. That's not instead of brave. That's what brave is made of. Ariel looked at the words. She looked at the bar. She looked at the R in Rusty doing its stutter. She wrote, Okay. Donna. There it is. She got out of the truck. The bar in the late afternoon was a different animal from the bar at 4 a.m., and different again from the bar during a siege. It had the specific comfortable weight of a space returning to its own center of gravity, the low-level noise she felt through the floorboards, the smell of coffee and old wood, and the decade-long accumulation of smoke and leather, and the kind of human warmth that came from people who had been through things together and didn't need to perform their comfort with each other. Sage was at a table near the back with a plate of food and the particular expression of a person who had been given something substantial and was in the process of deciding whether they were allowed to have it. Ariel went over. She sat across from Sage and put the whiteboard between them like a shared resource. Sage looked at it. She looked at Ariel. She wrote, Are you staying here? Ariel. For now. Sage. Me too. They said for now. Ariel looked at her. She wrote, For now is enough. Sage read it. She went back to her food. After a moment, she pushed the plate to the center of the table between them in the specific gesture of someone who had grown up in environments where sharing was not offered, but was the most direct language available for certain things. Ariel took a cracker. They sat together without needing to say anything else. Burklaw was behind the bar. Of course he was. It was the natural ecology of him, the place where the gravity that organized everything else had its origin point. He had a fresh coffee and the road map from this morning, still pencil-marked, folded to a specific section she didn't examine. The cut above his eye had been properly closed at some point during the day, 3 small strips of medical tape doing the job cleanly. She went to the bar and sat on the stool. He looked at her. He looked at the go-bag still on her back, which she was aware she hadn't taken off since this morning. He reached under the bar and brought out the first aid kit. The same one, she thought, from the first night. He set it on the counter. She looked at it, looked at him. He raised the same eyebrow as the first time. She looked down at her hands, the cut across 3 fingers, the tape from 2 days ago, doing the job but overdue for changing. She hadn't noticed. She'd been carrying it without noticing, the way she carried most things. She changed the tape. He watched the door and didn't hover and didn't comment, same as the first time. When she was done, she put the kit back on the counter and she wrote, What happens to Harker? He read it. He wrote, That's between us and him. But he's out. He knows that. Ariel. His son. We're handling it. He paused, added, Harker spent 2 years in a bad position. He made wrong choices. He also tried to get Sage out a window at 4 a.m. when he had other options. Both things are true. She looked at that. The specific acknowledgement that people could be multiple things simultaneously. That a wrong decision didn't permanently foreclose a right one, and a right one didn't retroactively correct a wrong one. She thought about her mother's handwriting on the county office paper. We'll figure the rest out. She wrote, Both things are true is hard to live with. Most true things are. She looked at him. She wrote, You've done it a long time. He read it. Something moved through his face, unhurried, real. He wrote back, I've had practice. The wars. He looked at the wars and was quiet for a moment with it in the specific way of a man acknowledging a thing he'd lived through without opening the door to the room where he kept it. He wrote, Among other things. Does it get easier? He held the board. He looked at it for a while. He wrote, and the writing was careful and slow. Easier is the wrong word. You get better at carrying it. The weight doesn't change. Your capacity does. She stared at that. She thought about 3 backup markers and a go bag and a window she'd spent 2 years working loose. She thought about the invisible girl who had been building capacity in the dark without knowing that's what she was doing. She thought about 3 miles of burning pavement. She wrote, I think I've been building capacity for a while. He read it, and his face did something that she had not seen it do in 4 days. Not the compression, not the controlled gravity, not the professional flatness. Something warmer and more private than all of those. Something that lived in the specific place where a person's real face was, the one underneath all the ones they'd learned to wear. He wrote, "I think so too." The evening came in the way Nevada evenings came in, fast and total, the temperature dropping hard and the stars arriving all at once, without the gradual dimming of a more forgiving sky. The neon of the rusty chain went full orange in the dark, and the R stuttered its heartbeat, and the lot filled back up as the remaining Arizona riders came in from wherever they'd been, and the California contingent that had stayed through the day settled in for the night. Ariel sat outside on the front step of the bar. She'd taken the go-bag off. It was beside her on the step, which was a thing she noticed only after it happened, the way you notice the absence of a weight you'd been carrying long enough that the absence was the new information. The desert was cold and very clear. The mountains to the west were black shapes against a sky that went from deep blue at the horizon to black overhead. And the stars were the kind of stars that existed in places where there was nothing to compete with them, which was most of Nevada and which Ariel had spent 12 years being unable to hear under and had never particularly minded because stars were not primarily a sound experience. The door opened behind her. She felt it through the step. Burklaw sat next to her. He had his coffee. He was wearing his jacket now, the one with the cuts and the patches and the particular accumulated weight of a garment that had been worn through real weather rather than for appearance. He sat with the unhurried quality of a man who had nowhere to be and had made peace with that. They sat for a while in the cold without any communication passing between them, which was fine, which was its own kind of thing. The specific comfort of a shared silence with someone who understood that silence was not the absence of connection, but sometimes its most honest form. Then he took his phone from his jacket pocket. He typed something. He held it out to her. She looked at it. The screen said, "You saved us, kid." But truth is, you saved yourself too. She looked at the words for a long time. She thought about 3 miles of burning pavement. She thought about the whiteboard she'd held up in the doorway of a dark bar with her hands shaking and her lungs burning and everything she owned on her back. She thought about Donna's handwriting. That's enough. She thought about Sage sharing a plate of crackers across a table. She thought about her mother's handwriting on county office paper. We'll figure the rest out. She thought about the R in the neon sign doing its half-second stutter like an irregular heartbeat, and how she'd watched it from the highway shoulder for 4 years, and how she'd never once imagined that she would one day sit on the step beneath it and feel, not safe in the uncomplicated sense, not healed, not repaired, but present, chosen, known. She took the phone. She typed back, "I know." She handed it to him. He read it. He put the phone in his pocket. They sat in the cold under the Nevada stars with the engines and the voices and the warmth of the bar behind them, and somewhere out on the highway, a set of headlights moved through the dark from one direction toward another, and the desert was very quiet around them in the specific way of a place that had held a long and difficult thing and was now releasing it into the night air where it could dissolve at its own pace. Ariel looked at her go-bag beside her on the step. The backpack she'd packed and repacked 17 times since she was 10 years old. The 3 backup markers in the front pocket. The $43 in small bills. She thought, I don't think I need to keep this by the door anymore. Not yet. It would take more time than tonight, more than a week or a month to break the habit of a thing that had been survival infrastructure for that long. But the thought was there, clean and specific, and it was hers. She looked at the highway. Wide and empty and running in both directions toward things she hadn't been yet, which was different from the way it had always looked before. Not a road to delay coming home from, not the long daily crossing between one kind of silence and another. Something else. Something that went somewhere. The neon stuttered. The engines murmured behind the door. The cold moved through the desert in its particular clean Nevada way, carrying the smell of dry earth and distance, and the specific honesty of a place that made no promises but kept the ones it made. And Ariel Brooks, 12 and a half years old, sat on the front step of the Rusty Chain Bar in Cinder Valley, Nevada, in the company of a man who had believed her without hesitation and would continue to, in a world that had been brutal and then suddenly, unexpectedly, inexplicably, For reasons that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with 3 miles on burning pavement and a whiteboard held up in a dark doorway, become something she had no previous word for and was only now, slowly, carefully, beginning to learn to call home.